I call this meeting of the Brainerd Planning Commission on February 21st to order. And step one, roll call.
Duval.
Here.
Gorham.
Here.
Grunenwald.
Here.
Norwood.
Here.
Stangline.
Here.
Peterson.
Here.
Francis.
Here.
All right. Do we have a volunteer to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? James? Great. Appreciate that.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. That gets us up to the most exciting portion of tonight's program, number 4, the oath of office. And I need to welcome Dave and Colin, our 2 new members, and we're going to do some swearing in.
Sounds good. We'll have you guys both stand up and raise your right hand and then repeat after me. So I state your name.
I, Dave Peterson,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
That I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the
state of Minnesota,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the Office of Planning Commission
the duties of the Office of Planning Commission,
of the City of Brainerd, Minnesota,
City of Brainerd, Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
Sounds good? Congratulations.
Welcome aboard, fellas.
thank you.
All right. Next up is the approval of an agenda. Before we go any further, there was some of us were watching the local public access TV last night, and the city council took on the short-term rental. We've been kind of going back ordinance that we've been kind of going back and forth. I think we're getting closer. Talked to James today, I think. I was overconfident last time. Talked to James today, and what we want to do is add 7B, and that will be a discussion, and I think you got the handout there, on short-term rentals. So I think this would be a timely thing for us to get a little discussion and talk about what our next strategy is going to be. With all that being said, looking for an approval of the amended agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I've moved. We have Duval and we have James. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We have an agenda. Terrific. All right, looking for an approval of the minutes from January 17th. Looking for a motion.
Make a motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion. Looking for a second.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are in business. All right, we are going to move to 7A, and that we're going to conduct a public hearing and review the administrative subdivision ordinance. And with that, I'm going to turn to James and say,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the proposed ordinance will make it easier for staff and developers to understand and administer the administrative subdivision ordinance. The objectives of the ordinance are to create better definitions for boundary line adjustments and consolidations, allow for the adjustment or consolidation of 3 properties rather than 2 to reduce the administrative burden on developers and builders. Currently, anything more than 2 would require a plat. Allow for the base lot subdivision of commercial buildings, and state a clear restriction on when the parcel can be administratively subdivided in the future. With that, staff recommends to conduct a public hearing and approve the ordinance as proposed, and I can answer any questions.
questions for James? For the new members, this is a little bit wonky, what this one is, but it's something that's basically it's gonna help the planning department move more quickly on these things, not get kind of bogged down like we were getting bogged down in the past. So this is something that should just get things to move a little bit better, a little bit faster. So that's the background on this, is why we're doing this. Without any questions, I'm gonna open a public hearing at 6:04. Is there anybody here tonight that would like to speak on the matter of the subdivision rule? Nobody? Anybody online? All right, hearing nothing there. Any discussion from commission members?
Oh, I did have one question on
Please.
the property split. Is to create no more than 2 lots. For consolidation, it was 3 adjacent lots. Is there a reason for the number 2
It's on that
versus
one.
3? What was the reasoning there?
So consolidations or boundary line adjustments seem like a lot of times people want to propose 3 with that.
Okay.
When you're doing lot splits, it becomes a little bit more complicated because then almost wanting to create a subdivision instead of a plat. So the more you're allowed, the more it might affect the development of an area. So the boundary line adjustments, consolidations kind of clean properties up when maybe there's overlapping lines on buildings, that type of thing. It's not usually to create new parcels for building. The new parcels for building, it would be more of the lot consolidation part that should have, maybe a little bit increased scrutiny from Planning Commission and City Council.
Gotcha.
A little bit of housekeeping here. I probably should close our public hearing, and then we can continue with any discussion from commission members. Any other questions? And if we don't, I'm looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve the administrative subdivision ordinance as proposed.
Second.
All right, we have a motion. We have a second. Any discussion on the motion? Not hearing any. Would you like to do a roll call on this one, James? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Same sign. All right, we changed the rules. And that easy.
And process going forward on that?
Yeah, we'll
Mr.
go
Chair,
forward to the
please?
city council, I presume, at this point.
Yep, so that'll go to the next City Council meeting. There'll be 2 required readings, and since the public hearing was conducted at the Planning Commission, staff's not going to be recommending a public hearing at City Council.
Okay, all righty. That will take us to 7B at this point, which is going to be the discussion on short-term rentals. I'm just kind of wondering if we want to jump ahead to the new business, but I don't think we should be too long here. So let's, James, if you can kind of talk a little bit about what happened last night at the city council?
Yeah, so the City Council conducted the second reading of proposed ordinance 1561 regarding short-term rentals at their last meeting. The motion to approve the ordinance as proposed failed by a 4-3 vote. Council members provided comments that staff included in the memo, just kind of a quick recap of what some of the issues were. One was not excluding the town center and Main Street districts from the municipal caps. There's a council member that believed that this area could benefit from tourists staying downtown and may help incentivize owners to revitalize their buildings. I know that came up in the past from some applicants saying that the buildings are renovated maybe more than even a long-term rental because they're short-term rentals that have to be advertised. The cap of 1 per person and the fact that the grandfather clause allows 1 person to own 3. And then having a cap of 20 is an arbitrary number, as stated by Councilmember Chezak. Councilmember Stangline also did explain that this is not meant to be a permanent ordinance, but puts blocks in place to adjust as needed in the future. So that was discussed at council as well. Councilmember Chezak motioned to recommend that we keep the recertification at the end of the year. Right now, there's a few of them that don't have expiration dates, so they did like that added portion to the short-term rental ordinance, but did motion that there'd be no limitation to the number owned by an individual, and a motion to send it back to the Planning Commission. The motion was approved by a 5-1 vote. So with that, staff is looking for direction from the Planning Commission to potentially bring it back to the next meeting with a public hearing.
Thank you, James. I want to thank Tiffany for a great job last night in presenting it, and I was pretty happy that we got 3 votes. Not bad. I think we're getting really close. And but then the question becomes, I think what we learned last night are where the objections are. I think we can kind of identify the objections, and then I think.
I thought we knew that before.
I thought we did too, but it's a moving target apparently, Mike. And so then we have to kind of think. Essentially, this is bargaining. This is negotiating. Is kind of the stage we're at right now. And so, and what I'm looking for are ideas. What are we comfortable with in terms of backing, kind of maybe stepping back from where we're at? What's our comfort level with some of the propositions that were put forth by city council members? Yes.
Since I'm new, so.
Sure.
Is it a big issue in town, the short-term rentals? Are there a lot of problems going on with them right now?
Well, I think right now, what we're finding, and I'll let James kind of talk about this too, is that there were a lot more than we think there are. What the staff has been doing is a regular search of Airbnb and looking for every Brainerd advertised rental that doesn't match up with the records, and finding a pretty good number of them that are popping up. Want to talk about that, James?
Yeah, so right now we have, I believe, 8 of them. There's another applicant that is going to be proposing at the next planning commission meeting that just missed the cutoff date for this one. I think I do field quite a few calls from them, so it is increasing in the area. In our area, we don't have any lakefront property, so I do think that's kind of a big driver of short-term rentals, but we do have the hospital here, so they do look for potential traveling nurses. You look to some of the other communities in Minnesota, and they are also looking, you know, especially in tourist areas such as Duluth, St. Paul, Ironton, of trying to make sure that you know, short-term rentals don't affect the workforce housing in the community. So it's something that, you know, Brainerd's looking at, but kind of greater Minnesota as well as Metropolitan's looking at it as well. So it's kind of not unique to Brainerd itself.
But there's no problems with them right now.
As of right now, we don't, you know, we have probably 8 to 9 of them.
Why are we trying to limit it?
Well, a lot of it comes from the fact that we work with a comprehensive plan, and we crafted the comprehensive plan that set out very clear goals in terms of housing, very clear goals in terms of our neighborhoods, and you know, preserving the housing stock, providing options for workforce housing was so important. I can just speak personally here, and we had a hearing on one on Hawkins Drive. It was on Hawkins Drive, which is kind of a little cul-de-sac drive, and it was interesting. It was a very nice couple came in, and their neighbor is the Airbnb, and they just talked about the constant people coming and going, problems, and it kind of caught my attention, and I think it caught a lot of us attention. We realized what effect these can have in sort of unraveling neighborhoods. And also what they're doing is you're taking neighborhoods like on the north side, which are very, you know, neighborhoods that are about family, raising families, people participating in the communities. And from one angle, what we're doing is we're kind of just turning our neighborhoods into hotels. So there's definitely a balance here. There's a balance between property rights, and there's a balance between our goal, which is to follow the comprehensive plan, which is to create a better town, a better community. So that's my 2 cents worth. I'm certainly willing to take any other feedback, any other questions.
You know, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also simply comment that the cap of 20, after a lot of discussion in several previous rounds, the intent of that was to allow room to grow out. And we learn about these things in that process. And at such time as we approach the cap of 20, then there's the opportunity to reevaluate how is this going. If we're not seeing problems, it allows you to further that number. What becomes terribly difficult is sort of the discussion that's embedded in the comments now, that when you get this kind of a use out there on the ground, it's difficult to then pull it back in if there's changes that would be appropriate or problems that are arising. So that's sort of where that cap entered into the overall draft of the ordinance, to say that this allows us to kind of watch and learn, and we can make adjustments in this as we go forward, and we can always open up for more later on as we approach that cap. So that's sort of, you know, my recollection of how we landed in the spot that this number is in this draft ordinance now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Duvall. And to back up a little bit, we originally got involved in this at the request of the City Council. They requested that we take a look at this, and that's how we got involved. And this has been I think a pretty well thought out process. We've been working through this for months here. It's definitely evolved. I think we're getting a better idea of how to approach it, and you know, again, strike that right balance between property rights and the vision we have for a livable community.
One other follow-up with that, in the B, Section 2, is limited to 21 days is all someone can stay in a short-term rental.
I'm going to turn to James. Don't we have there's 3 classifications, right?
Yes, there's 3 classifications. So there's the cap of 20 that as of right now has municipal caps where you have 20 of them. In the traditional neighborhood, contemporary neighborhood is 10 each. We have 1 per multifamily building, 1 per owner. So that's municipal caps. The one that you're looking at really isn't a part of that municipal cap. So that's related to homesteaded buildings. So they'd still be required to get an interim use building, but it wouldn't be counted towards that cap.
Well, I just know, my point, I guess, is, you know, some of these traveling professions that are coming, and I look back at my daughter was in physical therapy, and they had internships. One of her students, fellow students, Scott in Cuyuna, couldn't find rental, 60 days. What is she supposed to do? Lucky she stayed with us. My daughter wasn't even there. But I mean, I'm sure that goes on in other things where that 21 or 28 days, to me, a short-term rental is just, why is there a limit, I guess? Then it just becomes long-term, and we got them everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, a comment on that, James, on looking at that, the 21?
Or 28, or there's a.
Yeah, so I know that was something that, because we weren't, they could always apply for the VDU if they want to expand that to as many days as possible. So if it's not counted towards the cap, then you'd be limited to that 21 days. There's also the other provision in there that if you're living there at the same time as well as somebody else's, in your instance, if it's 60 days that they're staying there, that could just then potentially be a long-term rental. So this is, maybe meant for somebody that, has a lake place or is gone for a weekend, wants to rent it out for, maybe Brainerd International Raceway, something like that. Mm-hmm. That's what that provision's made for, and it can expand beyond that 20 cap.
Thanks, James.
Okay.
Anybody else have thoughts? Yes, Commissioner.
You brought up Cuyuna, and Mr. Chair, I think that one of the communities that I have looked to and heard from with regard to what a problem and explosion of short-term rentals can be is the Cuyuna area. And on the one hand, it's great to see what's going on in Crosby. On the other hand, they've had an absolute explosion of short-term rentals over there, eating into their housing stock for people to actually live there. And that's what we're trying to avoid, so that people can still find a place to live. And actually be members of our community.
Very good. Thank you. Yes.
So we're trying to balance the needs of workforce housing. Part of the consideration is balancing those needs versus property rights
Yes.
of the owners. Do we have an estimate of, there's probably, I believe, a housing shortage situation. Do we have an estimate on how big the housing shortage problem is in Brainerd?
I'm going to, James, are you familiar with the HRA did a study on workforce housing? And can you, James, you're kind of familiar with that work?
I do. I know that there is a considerable shortage in Brainerd as well as within the county as a whole. I don't have the exact numbers for you. I know Mike Duval is on the HRA board and may be able to answer some of those questions if he has exact numbers. But, I could certainly provide that information to you at a later time. There is a housing shortage, though.
Okay. Yeah, I just wonder if we had an estimate, then that would help to inform a cap somewhat.
Yeah. And again, I kind of think what we're thinking of here too is you start the cap with a lower number and you move on. One of the things that's so interesting about this is we did a pretty good job of a comprehensive plan a few years ago. You know how many times this came up in the comprehensive plan discussion? 0, if I remember, 0. It wasn't even on anybody's radar. So it's one of those things that's moving so fast on the radar. That's part of the motivation here, to get some numbers out there, to get ahead of it, and as opposed to, what was the toothpaste back in the tube? Was that your, the good analogy last night? And so then you can certainly in 5 years say, we think the cap actually can go up to 100 or something like this. You're never going to go back the other way.
Right. Would a sunset clause or something like that, do you think, make it more agreeable to them, where we say, like, we will revisit it on this date?
Well, can we do that? It would be like an interim ordinance. I don't think we can do that.
No? Okay.
No, but it's just something that Planning Commission could just direct staff to do once we get to a certain point.
The general, what's neat about the Planning Commission is that the process, the timeline from us hearing about something to getting it towards the City Council, it's not long. It's a couple, 3 months. Usually somebody will bring it up, and a member will bring it up, we'll discuss it, and then if there's a consensus, we'll direct staff to look into it, and that's how the process starts moving forward. So that's what's nice about small town local government, is that it's not that long between having an idea, having a discussion, and taking action and moving forward. So it gives me some confidence that we can, if we screw it up, we can fix it. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if this might help in any way. Mr. Duval and I were at a meeting two months ago, maybe, and a representative from the college was there and told us that they were looking for 200 beds for 200 heads, just the college.
Oh, wow.
So just the college we're 200
Wow.
beds short.
Okay.
So more than that.
So, okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah, that just seems like it's a lot. That's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah, it's a lot. Housing is tight. And what I would kind of like to see us do is if anybody, are we willing to look at the provisions we put out there that are willing to say, here's where we can step back. I think what we got 3 or 4 specific things we were pushed back from the city council. I should say constructive feedback. Let me say constructive feedback from the city council on it. And I think we have a consensus on the group, I could be wrong, that we like the cap for now, but then the question comes to the grandfathering, the question becomes to, just how you want to, the downtown, how should the downtown district and the Main Street district be treated differently? Should they, and Mr. O'Day wants them to be treated differently. As Councilman O'Day really sees that you should have downtown and the main corridor opened up to these opportunities. I think Mr. Duvall and others have pointed out that there is a lot of workforce housing that happens downtown right now. Mr. O'Day's comment last night was there's workforce housing everywhere. Maybe, I don't know. But that was, so that's kind of what that's another one of the issues we have to kind of see, is it going to be a smart area for us to step back? This is that type kind of thing in local politics where sometimes you have to say, I've got 8 great ideas, but if I can get 5 of them through, I've made things a little bit better, right? So that's what I would be looking for tonight is seeing where we could give. And any ideas would be welcomed. Because yeah, go ahead, Mr. Duvall.
Thank you. I still don't quite understand what Alderman O'Day is trying to get at for the housing for tourists staying downtown. And, our ordinance is not in the way of creating that opportunity now, so I'm not sure how making short-term rentals available removes whatever the barrier is. If I were to say what the barrier for setting up a hotel in downtown Brainerd is, I think it focuses around parking, and I think it's simply a symptom of lack of imagination of how to get there. There's parking to be had. You may have to contract and reserve parking. So I don't know that the problem is that the ordinance is keeping us from developing housing opportunities for tourists in downtown Brainerd. I'm just fearful that we're extending this and using this tool to try and create an opportunity where we already have an opportunity. And at the same time, we may take significant collateral damage when we have a proposed 78 housing unit development proposed for downtown. And right now, that would be all available as workforce housing. And then we would turn that from long-term available housing to address our needs to now a portion of that going to short-term. And so I don't know that we want to have that kind of collateral damage to address a problem that is different from the ordinance being a barrier. So if anyone could explain or clarify whether that's Madam Stenglein or James or others that may understand what Alderman O'Day is after, that would help me immensely, because I don't see how this removes a barrier that's there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm going to take a stab at it. And within that, I need to ask a few questions, if I may.
Please, go ahead.
Within doing a VDU or any vacation dwelling unit type use that we might be permitting and licensing for, is there the ability to still do long-term rental within that exact same property?
Yes.
So primarily the reason why, as to the question, is the flexibility within the specific unit. So that way you can easily transition back and forth dependent upon what the market is existing. So it's kind of dual licensing as to the, to facilitate for that back and forth. It's not exactly dual licensing because there isn't any other, they already have a rental license as just to be able to get that. And so that's more or less the goal of what oftentimes exists within, it's really hard for me to say what exactly that, I call it a taxpayer. So you have dwelling units above, a commercial business down below. That's oftentimes they use that format as for the flexibility of it within other areas and municipalities. And we're seeing that strongly within the neighboring community of Crosby and Ironton. Does that help?
I think it's helpful to have that flexibility so that you don't have an extended vacancy in a unit, and because that costs you money. You've got overhead to these units if there's not a body in it making a rental payment. At the same time, if you were to advertise a house for rent in Brainerd, you would be swamped with applications. So I don't see the dead time in there. And what I would be nervous about, and this gets to the worry part of this. And so this is the worry list, and is the worry list sufficient to regulate? And that's the fair question on the table. But the worry list is that the revenue from a short-term rental far exceeds the revenue from a long-term rental. And so there's that would tend to drive towards where the money would be from a landlord's perspective. And I'm a landlord, so I understand that. If you're not thoughtful about how we're implementing this, you will see a trend up to whatever the market can support. There will be, is it 20, is it 100? Up to what the market will support, you'll be seeing sort of that shift over there. And does that help us with the long-term housing needs that are identified in the Crow Wing County Housing Study, or the desires expressed in the comprehensive plan? But I think that flexibility, I can certainly see the value of having, so you can be nimble depending on your rental situation and the occupancy of your units.
Thanks, Mike. And I would just add that I think if you're going to look at the flexibility, that's where a cap is so important in order to maintain what you're really trying to do with this housing, which is to provide business in this town with the workers they need. James, you have a question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add one thing to that. So tourism, I think, is only part of Councilmember O'Day's consideration for that. The other part is, some of these are large historic buildings. It can be quite, costly at times to renovate some of these. So, if you can incentivize a renovation and kind of recoup those costs with the short-term rental, because you do get more income from that, I think that was also, a potential consideration from him. It would, open up existing ones to just automatically be transferred to short-term rentals. But as we've heard from other applicants with short-term rentals, there's kind of a higher standard needed to be able to advertise online and try to get people to come to it. So that was also part of the consideration, I believe.
Thanks, James. Other thoughts?
Mr. Chair, I have something.
Yes, please.
Is the thought that do we have evidence that the demand for short-term rental downtown is currently higher than for surrounding areas that would justify it being treated differently, or is it kind of a theoretical? Maybe this would be a tourist hub.
I'm thinking it's theoretical in my experience downtown. I think downtown rentals are full. That's my experience. And talking with Dave Parenter, I work at the Bridge of Harmony right across the street. We've been watching, Dave did a terrific job of rehabilitating the building across the street from us. And I think once in a while a rental comes up that I hear about, and that's about it. And so I think things are tight all over. So that's the concern, is that we don't want to make that worse.
Okay.
But I can also understand the economic viewpoint too. Tiffany.
James, are any of our current ones in the Main Street corridor?
They're not.
I didn't think so.
Okay. I think what I'd like us to see to get to is, the goal tonight is this. If we, maybe we can't do it tonight, I understand that, but the goal would be to give directions to staff so they can make revisions to the ordinance, so we can come back next month and conduct a hearing. It's our job to conduct a hearing on this, and then give something else back to the city council on this. Maybe we're going to conclude tonight that we have more thought, more questions, and we're not ready to go forward, but that's what my hope is, that we could figure out how to give staff direction on this. And some of that, frankly, is going to become to how can we compromise, work with the views on city council, and come up with something that's going to work. So with that, I'm very open to suggestions.
I think we're trying to business is gonna, free enterprise is gonna control things if there's money. I cannot see short-term rentals taking off in Brainerd anytime soon. You're looking at lake stuff. I just can't see a house in northeast Brainerd being a short-term rental. If it is, what's the difference between that and a long-term rental? I'm not swayed, I guess, at this point, why the numbers have to be capped. I think they need to be regulated, just like long-term rentals are. But this isn't gonna help our housing stock. Totally different market, the people that do that. I have rentals also. I would never do short-term rentals. Way too much work. It's a totally different market that you're looking at.
Thank
And if
you.
we only have 8 or 9,
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughts. The concern is like a neighborhood on the north side or near the hospital. The north side has been received pressure from the hospital for years, whether it's turning houses into parking lots and things like this. And the pressure now is houses that used to house families that were part of the community are now being basically turned into short-term, long-term motels, long-stay motels. That's part of the concern. That's something that, and again, what we're trying to do isn't to make sure our views win. We're trying to carry out the work of the comprehensive plan, the goals that we have all agreed to. So that's the overall goal that we are shooting for. That's what's motivating us. Any other questions or thoughts? Proposals?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, I'd be willing to really let go of D1. D1 is the property owners, individuals, or companies are limited to the operation of one VDU upon approval from the interim use permit in the city. So remove the cap on the number one can operate. And I think the most important elements in here to preserve are the overall cap, that's D2, and I think the proximity or the adjacency limit, which is D3. To me, those strike me as the two most important elements of the municipal caps that we have in place. And I don't know that I see any objections in the text here that jump out at me that deal with other aspects, the grandfathering. We can talk about the grandfathering, but the grandfathering, if you remove D1 and say we'll strike that, the grandfathering scenario still addresses multiples in one multifamily. So we still have a need to deal with trying not to disenfranchise someone who's gone through a prior process with this prior set of rules. So my proposal would be to say, let's strike D1 and retain the other caps as a starting point for discussion here.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Do you have, and I gather that you want to stay strong on the downtown and the central corridor.
I would prefer that,
Okay.
that the TN1 and TN, contemporary neighborhoods and the traditional neighborhoods are the places that we're really
Okay.
thinking about. So that would be my opening suggestion, is to say, how do we move forward with the feedback that's been presented in this staff memo?
Good. That's helpful.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, James.
Are you, to the chairman's question, are you also including that for Town Center and Main Street zone districts?
My proposal right now is to preserve D2 as
whole.
as it's presented here in this draft we're holding today.
Okay. Tiffany?
I think that if we want to get this through, I think we're going to need to move on the cap. I don't think we necessarily need to get rid of it, but to remove the 20 arbitrary number and pick a different arbitrary number that might be more agreeable to my fellow council members, maybe we go with 40. I feel like that's or some other arbitrary number that we pick. I think that it is, yes, there are sticking points in the ordinance, but I think that it's also about our sticking points on the ordinance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes some sense. Yeah.
So if we pick another arbitrary number, that might get us farther.
Mr. Duvall is working his calculator pretty
Okay.
hard, furious over there. And I'll explain a little bit of the backup. One of the things we did is we looked at how other communities approach this issue. We looked at what are other communities doing. Some communities were banning it, just banning short-term rentals completely. Others I thought were creative were the ones that set it at 1% or 2% of percentage of your housing stock. I liked that approach. And I suspect Mr. Duvall is working on a number as we speak here. I personally would be okay with a different, slightly higher arbitrary number myself. But what you thinking, Mike?
Just to try and put the number in perspective, so using the number 40, nice arbitrary grab. But using that, so we've got something to the neighborhood, in the neighborhood of about 6,500 housing units in the city. And about 48-ish or so percent of those are rental units. So that's probably about 1.25% of the rental units at 40 would be vacation rental units, right? Or short-term rental units. That's a livable number, right? And that's a 6 or 0.5% somewhere in that neighborhood for our overall housing stock. But we're really talking about the rental housing stock is the opportunity to be able to bring people into this community without having to start out with a new build.
Very good. I see 3 points we're getting close on. We're getting we've got the number of 40 and letting go of D1 and keeping D2 and D3. Any other thoughts on, are these recommendations that we can work with? Any other thoughts on it?
I do have thoughts.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So ultimately, if we had enough housing, this wouldn't be as much of an issue. So maybe the larger discussion to be had is how can we get more housing, which I'm sure no one's ever talked about.
Coming up later.
Yeah. Okay. But ultimately, I wish. And they're pushing back. I wish the city council potentially had proposals for increasing the supply instead of just saying we don't like a cap. I wish we were seeing some of that. But
Later tonight, I'll talk about an interesting proposal in the state legislature that's out there in housing. That's kind of mind-blowing, but we'll get to that later there, if anybody else has been reading the news on that. So, James, do we think we have enough to, because again, what we're doing tonight isn't, formulating something that goes right to the city council. What we're doing tonight is having staff draw up ordinance changes that we would be revisiting at our next meeting. Any other, does anybody want to add anything to James for the consideration here? Are we missing things? Yes, Mike.
Only that I would maybe like to hear from everyone here on what's been suggested here. I mean, what's the temperature of the commission here on those changes? Are they comfortable that it allows us to have a good ordinance product, addresses the concerns of council such that we can expect this to be able to have a decent chance of getting approval, and that when it hits the ground here, that we have an ordinance that's fair to the rental community, and at the same time gives us some ability to manage our workforce housing needs. So just like to hear maybe just the overall comments from the commission, if folks are comfortable with that.
Dave, would you like to start with your thoughts? Let's run down the line.
Sure. I like the number better because if we've got 8 or 9 now, 40 might not ever happen, to be honest with you. I think it's a non-issue when it gets down to it. I still think, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, that 21 or 28 days, I think that needs to go away simply because of traveling people that are coming here or interns, people like that. And maybe I misunderstood where that's at.
Yeah, so the third one, which is the VDU, does not have those restrictions,
Okay.
which is part of that 40 cap.
Okay.
That's for
Yep.
traveling
So
nurses.
you can rent for as
Okay.
many days as you want to.
Because that's part of the workforce or whatever because of, and I think that's what we're gonna get. I don't see a whole lot of vacations in the city itself. That's so the 40, I think, is much more prevalent, I think.
Mr. Stenglein.
I think this has, I'm ready to take half a loaf on this. Let me, it's like, I'll take half the loaf of bread to get something in place that we can work on.
I was
as
really
we go.
liking toothpaste.
We can put the toothpaste all over the loaf.
So we're gonna go ahead and spend half of the toothpaste.
Yeah. And I don't think that the difference between, as much as 40 is twice as much as 20, I don't think it's a significant enough difference. It's the idea that we're going to have some kind of guidance on this and some sort of regulations in place. And I still struggle with the alphabet soup of sorting out these different kind of units.
Yeah.
And I've been at all these meetings for, through the whole thing. I still struggle, so.
Very good. Thank you, Tiffany. Commissioner Norwood.
I appreciate the amendments, but I'm going to assume, and we all know what happens when I assume, that there will still be 4 individuals at the council that are not going to be appeased, and we won't meet the expectation based upon the amendments that are being suggested at this point. So personally, I would appreciate it if council would specify exactly what it is that they're looking for rather than just kind of keep on sending it back, because there were changes that were made as of the last proposal after it was shipped back. And so as to continue on sending something back and forth, it's really hard to meet unspoken expectations. And so if the discussion needs to happen at council, then let's have it at council. But if the discussion is going to happen here, then let's proceed.
All right. Thank you. We'll continue on there.
Yeah, without
got?
knowing exactly what they want, it's hard to compromise. I mean, it's a good start, I agree, but I agree with Commissioner Norwood that without really, obviously, when we read through this, a lot of different opinions, but I think there's more. We got a good start, but I think there's more to it, because going back and forth every month, and that's not going to get us anywhere. So that's my 2 cents.
Very good. Commissioner Duvall.
I'm happy and comfortable with the adjusted number. I think this is hitting us in the right direction still, up towards whatever that half loaf is. And I would agree with Commissioner Norwood. It would be a lot easier if it was a little bit more clearly stated, rather than the generalities, because we're guessing again, as we guessed the last time. But we're guessing closer, I think.
Yes. Yes. I think warmer is the word. Yeah. All right.
Keep dragging on. Warmer, colder. It just
Yes, sir.
let's get this done.
Yes, I think I like it generally. I think expressing it as a percentage of the available rental housing, I think that's a good idea. Of course, it needs to land on an actual number, but using a percentage as a guideline, perhaps using what other cities have done as a model, I think that's just a kind of a good way to approach it. And yeah, I find that to be convincing myself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And for my 2 cents worth here, some of this, is some of the things were pretty specific. It's like what Commissioner O'Day, or pardon me, Alderman O'Day was very specific about what he had to say. But I think once the troubling thing is once you dig down into these issues, they're not as simple as saying, well, just open it up to downtown, just open it up. It's not quite that simple. For better or worse, we kind of live in the weeds on this issue. That's what we do on issues like this. That's part of the role of the Planning Commission, is to spend 45 minutes talking out these issues and hopefully creating a situation where the City Council is going to go, I get it, and we can move along here. So I'm thinking we're getting closer here. Tiffany?
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
That's
you.
all right. I was rambling.
I wonder if we have hit the point where we might want to consider a joint meeting with the city council.
So moved.
That we can all be in the same room.
I really don't need any more meetings, but so moved.
In my 8 years on the Planning Commission, I'm afraid it's 8 years at this point, I have yet to see a single, I think we had one meeting where we invited the City Council and maybe Kelly showed up, and for one of them. And so that kind of left me going, I don't know about these joint meetings here. Thoughts, James?
So I had one other idea that could be a potential compromise. So since the cap was moved from 20 to 40, and then you'd probably space it out 20 in traditional neighborhood, 20 in contemporary neighborhood, you could potentially open it up to 2 per multifamily building because the cap has increased. I think the other city that we looked at had maybe a 10% per building. We looked at possibly 1 because our cap was so low at 20 that you'd maybe only have 1 in there. But if you had 2, that would essentially get rid of the grandfathering clause then, which I think could be helpful as well.
Yes, James.
So just to clarify, on the current permit holder that is on South Sixth, is that 2 units in that one, or is it 3?
They have 2 in that one. So it's, I think, a 4-unit building, but are allowed to do 2 short-term rentals.
Amen.
All right. Any thoughts on I'm trying to think what the next step would be. Do we, in terms of what James, gave us a couple concrete ideas there. Does anybody on the group think that these are things that we want to have drawn up in the proposed ordinance change? Mr. Duvall, what you're thinking?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think if Commissioner Norwood was sort of tongue-in-cheek or sort of thinking maybe there's a motion there, and that's why.
Sorry, for the sake of rules. I'm willing to make that motion to propose, to have a joint meeting on the subject of short-term rentals, so that way there is the most possible elimination of lack of communication that has been existing.
Okay, then, I just want to clarify, because I want to second that motion, and we can see if we
I
can.
will move to propose a joint meeting,
All right.
special meeting for short-term rental.
And I believe we have a
Second,
second.
yeah, so I just to check back, because I think, it would be worthwhile, if we can move to discussion at the moment, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
this discussion is okay.
We could allow staff to bundle up this conversation, give us a scratch document to then sit down with city council and say, are we boiling hot? Are we still cold? Where are we on this? And what are the fundamental changes that still need to be made? And so I think there's value in taking this conversation, making a staff revision, and sit down with city council on that.
So, James, Mr. Duvall is going a little bit further. He's saying, and I want to make sure you're thinking the same thing, that we have the staff recommendations, and then the next step would be to sit down with the city council, correct?
What I'm saying is that we sit down with city council, but we have some recommendations
Yeah.
here, something to react to.
Yeah.
And so we've got some conversation that we've had here, I think some general consensus on changes we think we could make, that we could put into that document, and if city council says, no, you're working in the wrong spot, you just,
Gotcha.
You
Yeah.
just, unredact that or
James, do you think you have enough to work with here? What's your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know if, you can give some quick comments on the ID that I had provided. And then the other thing to consider, do you want it a meeting or a workshop?
Yeah. To the new members
So
here.
moved for a workshop.
Well, we have an opinion on the workshop. The workshop thing, what's neat about workshops is they're informal. And they're much more of a just letting ideas fly and letting the consensus develop. A little less of moving in order and more of a just open discussion. That's the interesting part of it. They can get long-winded and they can last hours, but they're very interesting. I guess that we're still in discussion right now, and maybe we need to do we need to clarify the motion, whether this is a motion to a joint meeting or a meeting to a joint workshop, right? And what's the consensus on the group? Workshop or meeting?
I think a workshop makes sense. And I don't know if we would need to amend the motion, and the point is to sit down.
We're good enough here, okay. If we're good enough on that, any other discussion on what's being proposed? And James, you have an idea here, and you can help us with, I assume, with selecting a date here, because that's gonna be the trickier thing. In the past, what we have done is we've used Wednesdays, again, we've stuck with the same day at least, a different day of the month, but that would be my suggestion, is we look at a Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And I know we've used the fire hall the fire hall training room when we need to have more people. Also, we've done things here where we just change the chairs around. That works pretty well too, so we can get a larger group in. Tiffany, I suggest you have thoughts here.
Yeah, for city council, we tend not to do Wednesdays. When we've done those joint workshops with BPU or the park board, or, I don't know, we've had a few other ones. Maybe just more BPU. But I think that doesn't need to be part of the motion. That's something that can
The
be
time, we can work the time out.
sorted out.
All right.
And, we'll make it work, because I think there's value in this.
Okay. All right. Unless I'm mistaken, I think we're ready for a vote on the motion. And I'm going to say, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, James, you can drink your magic there and pull it together. And so at this point, we have moved on. Is anything else? Otherwise, we're moved on to 8A. We're going to conduct a public hearing and consider a conditional use permit for a daycare facility at 418 8th Avenue Northeast, better known as Bethlehem Lutheran Church. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So TCC, on behalf of Bethlehem Lutheran Church, has submitted a request for a conditional use permit to operate a daycare facility. As stated in the application, they're requesting 2 classrooms with a total of 16 children that would be staffed by 3 staff members in each room. The property is located in a traditional neighborhood 1 district, which requires a conditional use permit. The facility has been inspected and approved by the fire marshal for childcare. The facility also meets the setback requirements and has ample parking and drop-off areas for the parents. As stated in the application, the parking lot will be used at opposite times for daycare from the church, so it does work in conjunction with each other pretty well for the parking lot and drop-off. So with that, childcare is a need in Brainerd and is supported by the comprehensive plan. Land use goal 3 policy 2 states to encourage and attract stores and services for the daily needs of our community. Economic development goal 1 policy 1 drive infill and redevelopment towards areas where current infrastructure is present. Economic development goal 2 states support our workforce and help them thrive. In order for our workforce to be out there, childcare is an important aspect to that. I see one of the big additions that TCC is proposing is an outdoor play area. Brent, if you want to pull up the site plan, this will be located on the south side of the building, and they're proposing a 6-foot chain link fence with privacy slats. That's in order to meet the screening requirements for childcare facilities. Staff is recommending that the slats be earth tone in color to match the surrounding architecture, buildings, vegetation, that type of things, so it matches the neighborhood. With that, staff has not received any public comment and recommends approval of the conditional use permit for 2 classrooms with a total of 16 children with the following conditions: approved inspections and reviews by the fire marshal and building official prior to operation, and that the 6-foot privacy fence slat shall be earth tone in color and approved by the community development director. I do want to note that I somewhat amended that to include the 2 classrooms for a total of 16 children from what was in the packet.
All right, thank you, James. I want to open up the questions with a really dumb one. What's TCC?
It's a Head Start facility. So, and the applicant is here for any questions.
Okay.
Tri-County Community Action.
All right, good. Well, that helps. Any questions for James before we open a hearing?
Possibly one.
Yes, Mr. Norwood.
Being that we just did a whole bunch of administrative subdivision situation, do we also want to include the other parcels that are attached with that are immediately adjacent for record keeping?
I've talked about that before. You know, we could include the other parcels to it. The actual facility is on the one parcel. The parking facilities is not. I've asked the city attorney this in the past. I don't think it's a huge issue either way, but could be included.
Sounds good.
All right. Hearing no other, if we, Mr. Naval, a question before we go?
Yeah, a quick question on just the sign at the triangle there. Brent, you're doing a great job just a little further south. That sign, is that an electronic sign? And would the childcare opportunities and activities be announced on that? Because I think we're saying in here technically they don't have a sign or anything, and we wouldn't require it, but I mean, would they be able to take advantage of an existing sign like that and not require them to have some sort of a condition allowing a sign?
Yep, they'd be able to take advantage of that to
So
put something on there, as long as it meets the code
that's it.
requirements.
Okay, so if they were advertising that on that sign, that would be perfectly fine. We wouldn't have to make any conditional use language additions or anything.
Nope.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, very good. If we're set, I'm going to open the public hearing at 6:56. And if the applicant would like to speak, I would like you come on forward. If there's somebody who'd like to speak, there we go. Come on up. Your name and your address, and go ahead.
Jessica Martinson. I'm with Tri-County Community Action Partnership. Our Head Start program address is 2410 Oak Street.
Very good.
Yeah, and I think James covered most of what we're looking for. We're looking to add a couple classrooms in this existing church. They're willing to partner with us. We currently have a waiting list of 72 children that are waiting to get into our programs, and there's a huge child care deficit in our area. So we're hoping to build on what we have going on already and offer a few more slots for families.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate that. That's all. We may need you down the line, but I think that's a good introduction. Is there anybody here tonight that would like to speak on this matter? Going once? Anybody online that would like to speak on the matter? Nobody online? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing then at 6:57 and open it to a discussion from commission members.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, I strongly support. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of not support.
All right,
I have
very
to
good.
agree. I'm going to strongly support this as well.
All righty. Well, if we're all cheerleaders on this, then the next step, and that's okay, the next step is somebody would like to make a motion. I would just suggest that we consider the conditions that James attached to this.
So moved to approve the conditional use permit for the 418 8th Avenue Northeast with the attached conditions.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion?
And that includes the modified or the additions that the staff.
To clarify, yes, all those that are written and were previously spoken in the meeting.
Okay. All right, very good. Any discussion? Not seeing a lot of discussion on this one, and so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we have approved. Thank you very much.
Next steps on that is.
Next steps?
Yep, so this will be heard at the March 4th City Council meeting. As this is a recommending body, City Council has the final vote of approval.
All right, thank you very much, I appreciate that. All right, we are moving on to 8B. This is going to be, we're going to conduct a public hearing and consider a conditional use permit for an amendment for a 12-plex apartment. And with that, I'm going to let James get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this conditional use permit amendment request is to construct a residential 12-unit multifamily apartment building consisting of 2 two-bedroom units and 10 studio apartment units. The original proposed 12-unit apartment approved as a conditional use contained 8 430 square foot efficiency units, 2 910 square foot two-bedroom units, and 2 three-bedroom units. So the applicant has changed the floor plan as well as the existing elevations. Staff believes that the existing elevations, if you want to show those, Brent, meet the design standards of section 515-4.C2, which requires a different siding pattern or color between the first and second floor to add character to the building and be consistent with the neighborhood. So the applicant, with this amendment, has also removed parking spaces. After adoption of the new parking ordinance, we set requirements that didn't, before it was the 2 1/4 per unit, no matter how many bedrooms there were. That was scaled back to, for an efficiency or studio bedroom, would require 1 parking space. So the applicant was able to dial back the number of parking without having to apply for a variance. So based on the new calculation, the 12-plex is required to provide 14 parking spaces. The applicant is proposing 17 spaces along with 2 handicap spaces. So with the reduction of parking lot, staff is no longer recommending additional plantings along the east side of the parking lot. Staff did ask the applicant to provide a better landscape plan after some of the tree, or I'd say most of the trees had to be removed because of the grading requirements and the SWIP plans from the state of Minnesota and the MPCA. So the proposed landscape plan currently depicted by the applicant does meet the shrub and tree requirement, but the commission could consider adding more trees to the east side of property if desired to create some additional screening to the residential properties to the east. But for parking lot screening, I guess staff isn't recommending it at that point because it was pulled a considerable amount away from where it was previously. Staff is recommending adding an additional condition not listed in the packet. So you'll notice on the site plan, the building is listed as 47 feet away from the property line. The TN2 district requires a maximum of 20. So I think this would be a pretty easy thing to edit for a future plan for city council. With that recommendation, staff would be looking to meet the setback requirement of 20 feet, and then the applicant is also going to be proposing moving the building 5 feet to the south as well. However, with my recommendation, would be proposing to not remove any of the trees that are on the west side of the property. So bringing the building closer, 5 feet to the south, but not removing any of the trees that are currently depicted in the landscape plan. So with that, I can answer any questions. Included in the packet was the previous design and site plan as well as the exterior elevations, and the applicant is here also if you have any questions.
Very good. Questions for James?
Mr. Chair, James, could you clarify the setback? Is that from the, would that be from Third? So it needs to come closer to Third, is that?
That's correct. So the previous site plan that the applicant had did meet that requirement. I think that was an oversight by the applicant. So I did speak with Ms. Keeney about moving that forward. It shouldn't be an issue, and really that would have to be done prior to the council packet going out so council can review the final document.
Okay, thank you. No more
Questions for James? I have a question. You kind of went by fast there, but you were talking about the PCA being involved, or something about changing the slope or something.
Yeah, so that was really one of the reasons. I know the applicant tried to save as many trees as possible, told that to the planning commission upon the first CUP. So that's why there wasn't as developed of a landscape plan, because it was hard to tell what was going to be left there. Once staff was able to see as well, once the trees were removed, there was considerable grading that was in that area, a lot of slopes, a lot of depressions. So that was really to be able to grade to the MPCA requirements and the SWIP plan and the City of Brainerd stormwater requirements.
Back up again. SWIP plan? SWIP plan?
Yeah, yep. So that's all of the grading plans that are included in here.
What does it stand for?
Stormwater.
Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect.
Stormwater
Now I gotcha.
plans.
Now I
Yep.
gotcha. Lingo gets a little deep here sometimes.
Yep.
Okay.
So, because of all those requirements, that was really, one of the reasons for the large tree removal in the area. So staff did work with the applicant to develop a more thorough landscape plan that's depicted in here. Because the parking lot was pulled off, Planning Commission could still recommend screening on that parking side. I did work with the applicant to add a few additional trees on the east end of the property there between the Tyrell Drive neighborhood, but Commission could certainly add more trees if deemed necessary.
All right. Thank you, James. I appreciate that. I do have to express some dismay that anybody was surprised that there was a lot of terrain. When I first walked that property, before the project was first put out there, that was my takeaway. Is it had terrain. It looked like like there could be water running through it. That was my first thing that struck me. So it's kind of amazes me that we didn't find that till a little later. But anyhow. With all that being said, and if there aren't any other questions for James, I'm going to open a public hearing at 7:05 on this. And certainly would invite Ms. Kinney to let us know what's going on.
Okay, Vicki Kinney, Lakeshore. The property's on 3rd Street in Northwest Brainerd. So as you can see, I thought I memorized the ordinance when it came out. I mean, I had that thing down. And then when we were putting this together and having to change the building design, mostly just because of the costs. The other design, we'd like to have the units as individual as possible, but it is a more expensive plan. We didn't get some of the funding we were hoping for through HRA, so we did have to redesign, unfortunately, but we do like the new design, and I think it's going to do well. But my error completely, the 20 feet, I completely forgot that. I'm thinking, oh, we've got more space, more trees, let's set it back, and forgot that in the ordinance in TN2, we had to be 20 feet from the ROA. So that's why as we move the building closer, you'll see with the waste container area, that's going to be too close to the sidewalk. So we'll be moving it 20 feet from the ROI and then about 5 feet to the south so that we can have at least 5 feet to the south so we have a little bit more room for sidewalk and some green space.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If we have any other questions, we'll bring it back, but thank you very much. Is there anybody else here tonight who would like to speak on this? Looking around, anybody online? Nobody online? All right. Well, I'm going to close the public hearing. Yeah, unless you have a question for Ms. Kenny.
Yeah, questions for Ms. Kenny, if we could, please. If you would, thank you, Vicki. I'm sorry to,
Not a problem.
but we want to make sure you get good exercise.
That's I need it, so good.
So if I may, it's kind of a series of basic questions here.
Sure.
I wanted to check in on outdoor lighting. So you state you're not going to be adding any lighting to the parking lot?
If we did, I didn't want to bring it up the last time because I thought it was a whole other issue that would delay things. If we did, we'd probably go with some solar options. So instead of doing all the wiring. So, but at this point, so it's not in the plan.
But are you planning any building-mounted lighting?
Yes, yeah, in the
That would be
entryways.
shining down to illuminate walks and such?
Yes, yeah.
And maybe this rendering, it kind of shows us, would that be illuminating in each
doorway,
quadrant,
yeah.
north, south, east, west? You're going to be illuminating those areas?
Yeah, as you can see, kind of the little sidewalks going into the units.
Right.
Yeah, so there would be, lights at each of those entryways.
Is that projecting out? Is it projecting downward? In other words, is it soft
Yeah,
building lighting, or is it flooding an area and projecting out?
we would rather have something kind of what we have now is just more of a soft lighting, kind of almost like a porch light, where you can see access to get into your door and not have it be dark. But no, we're not, personally don't want to have a lot of bright lights on this property. It's kind of a nice wooded area. We kind of want to keep that.
And so that, I'm going to look over your shoulder at James, that would be compliant, would need to be compliant with the new lighting ordinance as well.
So you could
Yes.
add that as a condition into there. It needs to be compliant with the existing lighting ordinance.
Right, so that you get the drop off at the property line.
Yeah.
Such, okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to check in, so, you have a huge challenge in trying to pull funding from various sources. I appreciate how difficult that is and how this is very adaptive. We want to just check in, is the community center with the boarding house above still part of the plan that's been approved already? So I think you took the 112-plex
Right.
and that as one conditional use proposal. And so that part is still staying the same. You're going to have the community center, exercise or whatever was in there, plus the boarding is.
We are likely going to do some changes with that,
As
just
well.
to increase more housing. So we have another grant opportunity that we're going to be going for that we are feeling very hopeful about. So we want to do another 12-plex that you see that's got the old design. We would like to do a matching 12-plex. That we'll be coming back for. That's on the southmost lot. I don't know if you can see it's the old design. We'd like to do another 12-plex there. And where the health center with the boarding house on top, we still want to do that transitional boarding house, but we would like to add 3 like permanent apartments. And still have like a gathering room, but we felt like this point with funding, we may have to forego the desire for a health center and focus more on housing. So
Okay.
we'll be coming back for that change. Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate that. And, and then the previous design, this one here,
Yep.
to me was really interesting. And, I think it's visually interesting in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But also it had a more diverse housing options in it. I think you have, eight studios, two
bedrooms and two
and
3-bedrooms, yeah.
3-bedrooms. We've lost
Two
the
3-bedrooms,
3-bedrooms,
yes.
and we've lost 2 of the 4. So what you're proposing now is basically 10 studios.
And 2 family, 2-bedroom units, yes.
2-bedroom units.
Yeah, that's partly, of course, costs, because we're having to reduce our costs. Those bigger family units are more expensive. And then also the need, as we're talking with social services, the need, mostly it's going to be singles, so.
Yeah, I'm very sensitive to the balancing act you're going for. I sort of lament losing some of those, and as I'm looking and thinking about who picks this up after you. You're very passionate. You have a great mission. You have a huge task, nonetheless, to try and pull that vision together. But who picks this up after you, and is looking for this kind of housing mix? And to me, having those 3-bedroom units in there as well would be helpful, so that you've got sort of a diversity of families.
Our desire is
and
across
individuals.
across the street. We own the property that's between 4th and 3rd as well. And so, as you know, we don't have a picture of it, but there's a lot of individual lots along that road. And our hope is to do family, more like duplex, family homes there. And then we can build them a little less expensive because they're not commercial buildings. So then that could save some costs. So we're really hoping to add some family units. That would be more of the ideal location, is right across the street.
So that's where you would begin to pick up some more of the family types
Yes,
of-
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think, you and I have spoken previously about just sort of the heartbreak that we mutually felt about the loss of some of those mature trees. And, I'm not sure that what's reserved there is likely going to last either. I mean, the jack
we're
pines in
hoping.
there are pretty prone to wind throw and when they're exposed like that. But to the extent that we can figure out, that nice transition from the mature kind of canopy trees in the properties adjacent to your east, your west, and your north, and how we can, set the stage for that to sort of fill in there as well in your development. I mean, we're not going to ask you to plant 70-year-old maples and such. But,
Wish we
what is
could.
there that grows reasonably fast, can give you something stately. And to me, it's more than just screening the parking lot. It's more about trying to create that character of a
Yes.
nice boulevard, streets, and
Yeah.
nice shady lawns or shaded lots and things like
Right.
that. That's kind of the feel that you have around you, and it's certainly accented by the undeveloped parcel to the west and then the lowlands to the north. But we have that around that area, and it'd be nice to see if we can get those kinds of plantings in. You've got proposals for plug planting, and I recognize that's a cost consideration why you're going with plugs and things.
And that's where the lot is already treed, that center lot, kind of along there where the stormwater retention pond is, so we can maybe plug as much as we can there to eventually fill that area too. I guess it's not in this picture. It'd be the lot to the south.
Yeah, to the east there, I think, being able to get some stuff in, I'm not sure exactly, so I think in this drawing, I'm seeing the end of the stormwater pond up there in the top right.
Yes, yeah, it continues on.
So the rest of that is sort of graded and planted in something. I presume,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So, and you've got a utility easement in there that you probably have to respect as well.
Yes,
But
yeah.
But the ability to get something more than just a small plug tree in there would be pretty darn handy on
Yeah.
that side, in particular. So I'd be encouraging your landscape plan to take advantage as much as you can of getting more advanced trees in that area, and particularly focusing on the big ones. I like the idea that you've got edible plantings in there, but more than just apple trees
Sure,
and
oh,
things.
yeah.
Something that gets a full crown, I think, and gets up to some height.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely, I agree. We, as much as we can, I mean, I would like to be able to, depending on our budget, to get as many, I'd like to spade some trees in if we can, but I can't promise that because it does depend on what kind of grants we can get. But as many trees and big trees as we can, because we're wanting this to be a nice place to live too. And so when everything's wiped out and you just have little stubby trees around, it's not as welcoming. So we want fast growth. We also want it to be a nice, shady place that's welcoming for people that live there.
But
So,
if we can have a vision for what this looks like 40 years from now.
yeah,
I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And to be reasonable about saying, 40 years worth of growth on a basswood tree is a pretty nice basswood
yeah,
tree.
sure.
But I'll leave it at that, and I thank you for addressing those questions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Other questions for Ms. Kenny while we still have the hearing open? Any other questions for Ms. Kenny? Any other questions from anybody else? Anybody else inspired with the question? If not, we'll close the public hearing at 7:15, and we're going to move to discussion. Mr. Duvall?
Mr. Chair, if I could just pick up on the landscaping piece here, and maybe James could help us think about, how we address differently. I would like a little bit more assurances than if we can afford it, we'll put these trees in. I maybe look for a staff to maybe work with the applicant, or maybe if I could ask James to give us some comment on that.
Yeah, so the ones that are called out are required because of the tree number for the site, and then we have a tree size requirement. So they're gonna have to be a 15-gallon tree. So the ones that are called out there would have to be that requirement. If there's things around the retention pond or areas to fill in excess of those, maybe they do some 5-gallon containers or plug size stuff to, have some understory growth. But the ones that are actually depicted in the plan will have to be a 15-gallon container at least, which you're looking at, with a maple tree, probably a 10 to 12 foot tree, something like that. And then our requirements for conifers, I believe in our code is 4 feet. So that's where the 4 foot conifer comes from. So there would have to be, at least meeting that requirement for those trees.
So if I could follow up, so what I'm seeing in the project description document here for trees is birch, flowering crab, serviceberry, Ohio buckeye, elm, linden, oak, or maple. So the birch, flowering crab, serviceberry is not kind of really what I would be trying to speak to here about a taller canopy tree. The buckeyes, the elms, the lindens, and oaks are kind of getting at, I think, what we're trying to get at, to try and carry that continuity of these mature trees from adjoining properties and adjoining property lines, so you kind of have some continuity.
And I could work with the applicant. I think I mentioned serviceberry and flowering crab. Those would be ones that I'd picture kind of right next to the building.
Yeah.
But then you have these other areas that, are further from the building. Those would be, potentially then your overstory trees. And I can still continue to work with the applicant. And like I said, certainly take a look at that east side. And, if you think that there may need to be a few more trees in there, that could also be a condition potentially added as well.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
And do we think that spruce and pine are going to be durable in in a future warm climate here where we're going to see a lot of ice storms and things like that. Do we think those are going to do okay here?
Yeah, I would say stay away from Colorado blue spruce, but, you know, I wouldn't hesitate still planting a white spruce or a Black Hill spruce.
And pines, what would you be recommending, white or red or?
Yeah, either red pine or white pine.
Okay, just thinking about, you know, a slight nuance in temperature in our winters, and I've lived in places where ice storms ravage your trees, and the ones that take it the worst are the evergreens that just have the needles and carry that weight and break off pretty bad. Okay, well, you get the gist of, so what I'm hearing is that you'd be able to work with the applicant to maybe tighten up what plantings would be along that east line.
Yep, that's correct.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to slip one question in here. What do we have, is there anything like, so I've been asked to plant 60 trees, and I plant 60 trees and 58 die in the first year. Do we just move on?
Any required trees or shrubs would have to be replaced after the first year if they do die.
So there's like a year window? Is that
There's
what
a
there
year
is?
window.
Okay, that helps, good. Because I think it's going to be a challenge to find trees that are going to adapt climate-wise also to the soil over there too, because that's just all sand over there. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Other questions or points of discussion? If I'm not hearing those, somebody want to take a stab at making a motion? Mike?
Mr. Chair, if I would, with one follow-up question to staff again, for the lighting piece, James, would this project have to comply with the revised lighting ordinance?
Yes.
Regardless, or because it was?
It would have to comply. You know, I think it may be good to add to a condition. The applicant, I wasn't aware that lights were going to be on here. You could state that all lights fixed to a building have to meet the required lighting ordinance. That means if there were to be parking lot lights that were added, that would probably have to be then come back as an amended conditional use permit for planning commission, unless you wanted to add that to the ordinance, or unless you wanted to add that to the condition as well.
So if I were to condition that all outdoor lighting shall comply with color and cutoff standards in the existing lighting ordinance, that may be redundant, but would.
I think it would suffice then to maybe
Clarify.
not have to come back for a conditional use permit amendment.
With that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the conditional use permit amendment for the construction of a 12-unit family apartment at property ID 410-40887. And are there conditions here already, or is that the extent of it?
There's the one that I added, that staff recommends that the building setback meets the front yard setback requirement, is moved 5 feet from the south. The adjusted site plan does not reduce the number of trees on the west side, and the updated plans must be included in the council packet.
So with that and the lighting conditions as verbalized here. So that's the motion.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Don't make me repeat it.
And just arbitrary again. And with that, any discussion on the motion? All right, then, do you want to do a roll call on this one? Is this informal enough, or otherwise we could just plan on?
I think you can.
All
just
right,
replace.
all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, next steps.
So this will be heard at the next city council meeting, which will be March 4th. As this is a recommending body, city council has the final approval or denial of the CUP amendment.
There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vicki.
Vicki?
All right, give you all a minute here. All right, with that, let's move on to 8C. This is the cannabis dispensary discussion. James, what do we know?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So staff recently attended a cannabis roundtable discussion hosted by Swanson Hascam Consulting. Staff included objectives, and we'd like to go through each one of them, kind of one by one, and receive direction from the Planning Commission as how to proceed. So I think, before I kind of summarize everything, I think it'd be good to just kind of go kind of one by one and then have a discussion about them.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay. Just gonna find my spot here quick. Okay, so the first one that staff would like to discuss is, so cities are allowed to adopt reasonable restrictions on time, place, and manner of the operations of a cannabis business, provided that such restrictions do not prohibit the establishment of the operation of the cannabis business. So essentially, you can't zone them out of a city based on some of the restrictions. Cities may prohibit the operations of a cannabis business within 1,000 feet of a school or 500 feet of a daycare, residential treatment facility, or an attraction within a public park that is regularly used by minors. So I put a couple notes on here. The state is working on a sample ordinance. I don't believe there's a head of the department right now. There's something that's still in the works. But obviously there's a need for this with municipalities, and municipalities have been asking about this because the rule does go into effect on January 1st of this next year. There was some talks about this discussion that potentially some groups of applicants would be allowed to even open sooner than that. Nothing's set in stone for that part, but there have been discussions with that. So a couple notes that I have in here, tobacco and liquor sales are currently allowed in all commercial zoning districts and the TN2 district. The tobacco kind of falls under just retail. There's not a separate section for that. So kind of the first question is, do we create a separate section for cannabis? Like we do have for alcohol, and should there be any special provisions like the, within a school, within a daycare, any other thing that would be in our allowed use section? And then should it be allowed in the TN2 district? So those are kind of some of the questions here on the first part.
Very good. I'm going to open it up, and questions for James.
We have to have them in town?
So how it works is a city of, every city is required to have one. 12,500 is kind of your next spot where there's still not clarification on how this works because the city of Brainerd is over 12,500. So would the city of Brainerd be required to have two of them in that event? Do you round down to it? So we still don't know that yet. Cities can kind of determine how many they want. That's going to be kind of another discussion potentially in more city ordinance, but I think Planning Commission has that discussion. There's also a county-wide number, and I believe Crow Wing County is maybe at 10 that would be potentially allowed in the county. Once a county reaches its 10, then Brainerd would no longer have to be required to have that one, if that makes sense. The city of Brainerd could still allow it, and you'd want to write this into code on how that works. But once the county reaches their limit, then Brainerd would no longer be required to have one at that point. But if the county hasn't reached the limit, Brainerd would be required to at least have one, maybe two, depending on what the department says.
That's guided by the state?
It's guided by the state.
Very
How do
good.
you go about picking one? Is it a lottery system? I mean,
So the state actually does that.
the state would pick who
Yep.
that person is.
Yep.
Okay.
Very good. Other questions for James?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
James, at your meeting, there's the liquor sales is pretty useful, I think, to help us look at parallels and decide how to best fit this new legal use in our community. And one of the things, for example, is that in off-sale liquor sales are permitted in our TN2 and TN3 districts. On-sale is not. And so you think, well, what is on-sale equivalent would be like a bar or a cigar lounge, right? And in the statute, places where it's legal to consume cannabis is private property and your private residence, but also places with approved license or an event permit. You know, so in our table of uses, we have a category of a private club or a lounge where that would be a conditional use in some of our residential neighborhoods. And so I'm trying to get at, was there any kind of conversation about sort of like a smoking lounge or was it thinking
So what I
about
was
mostly
told-
the sales?
Yeah, it would be strictly sales. Now, these are people from other states that were talking about this. So there was somebody that kind of works with the rules and regulations from other states. There's also somebody that came that owns dispensaries in other states as well and showed kind of pictures of what they look like. There is the Indoor Air Quality Act that really prevents them from doing it indoors. From what they said, they wouldn't be able to do it on the premise if they're selling from there. Now, I haven't talked to, legal advice on that part of it, but that seemed to be the answer at the roundtable discussion, is that they wouldn't be able to do it on site. Or that's something that they don't look for people to loiter kind of on public property either. They discourage something like that. But it could be written into the allowed use section that is, prohibits outdoor smoking on private property at dispensaries. So that'd be a potential something that I believe could probably be included in the allowed use section.
So to the key piece I think I heard in your response is that indoor air quality regulations currently in place would probably preclude having an indoor consumption club. So a private club or a lodge, they'd have to smoke outside, basically.
Yep. That's what I was told at the roundtable discussion. Again, there wasn't an attorney there from the League of Minnesota Cities, but I did ask that question.
Because and I think it would be super helpful to have the League of Minnesota Cities or the state's draft ordinance and say, let's make this, with whatever revisions might be necessary, your name here, your city name here. It'd be great to have that, but we're not going to have that. And it would be wise for us to at least have a game plan or some charted course where we think we want to go. And when that product comes, we have a sense of how we can adapt our discussions and our key consensus points into that.
So yeah, one possible part in the allowed use section could be, product is not allowed to be used on the premise or on the property.
Yeah, and I don't know that I want to see us get too far down the road on saying what, controlling how it's used. Let the statute guide that, but then the where piece is what strikes me as the most important thing for us to be able to decide is where do we allow that use. And if you drive around other states, I was just over across the river in La Crosse, and they've got dispensaries here and there for probably the low THC hemp products, I'm guessing. We see just across the city line here in Baxter on Washington, we've got dispensaries going up, we've got growing supply places. So this is launching. So we need to have our thoughts pretty well in place before January 1st for sure. So those are questions I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. I have a quick question for James. How many off-sale liquor licenses does Brainerd have, ballpark? How many liquor stores? 8? 10?
I'd have to check with licensing on the off-sale. I know on-sale liquor licenses are done within the city. I'm not sure how the off-sale works.
Okay. So we all know we have numerous bars, numerous places to easy access to alcohol.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Other questions for James, or anybody wanted to start the discussion? Please go right ahead. Mr. Duvall.
Maybe just a question about you know, how we would feel about, you know, my biggest focus would be to say, I don't know that we want to have dispensaries in our residential neighborhoods. You know, this is our TNs and CNs, right? Specifically, our established residential neighborhoods is really the way I want to think about that. The TN2, the Main Street, the town center, are all those kinds of neighborhoods where we have, like, again, if you look at the liquor sales, that's sort of the place where we allow those in our residential. Would we be okay with having that in our Main Street district on Laurel, you know, or Maple, or Front?
Sure.
Would we be comfortable having that in that couple of block area to say we have dispensaries in this area? I mean, what's the sense?
Oh, I have some thoughts on that. I know I watched a documentary on,
Googled it.
yeah, no, Boulder, Colorado, I believe it was, or no, it was a ski town in Colorado. They were one of the first towns to legalize recreational use, and they were anticipating a lot of tourist traffic from out of town and out of state to their small town, and they didn't really want the dispensaries in their downtown area. They moved them to the periphery. I don't think that's our situation here at all. So I think everyone's if they're gonna buy within their own town or their own city. Personally, I don't have an issue with someone walking out of a store with a bag, be it downtown or anywhere else. I guess that's my thoughts on that.
Very good, thank you. I would like to just talk a little bit about I looked at the comprehensive plan. When in doubt, look at the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan talks about supporting mixed use. It talks about integration in our neighborhoods, complete neighborhoods, not separate. It talks about thoughtful planning, promote reinvestment down the corridor, adaptive reuse, economic development, support infill and redevelopment, attracting new business, encouraging startups. All of these things say that this is Brainerd's way of saying that we're open for business, and we want business, we want development, we'd like to see it happen. Mike alluded to the Rise dispensary, which is opening essentially about 150 feet from the Brainerd city line, which in a certain way makes Brainerd's decisions kind of moot point because, you know, there is such a thing called Braxter. Braxter is kind of when Brainerd and Baxter, you're not really sure where you're at. That's kind of where I live. That's my neighborhood. And so, you know, we can talk, we want to take, you know, the moral high ground, you only can be so pure when we live basically in the BLA. We live with a lot of different communities, and I don't think shutting out is the way to go. To me, the simplest answer is you look at your every word. Every time in our ordinance where we have the word off-sale liquor, you add off-sale dispensary. And then, of course, you have your, you know, if you want to have special requirements on dispensary, that's fine. I just don't see how it should be treated any different than alcohol consumption. But that's my 2 cents worth. Other thoughts?
I think that's great.
Whatever you guys decide, I'm gonna vote against it 100%.
Yeah, explain.
It's just there's just no part for this in the state of Minnesota.
Okay.
Morally, that's just my opinion. So
Okay, very good.
Either way, it just doesn't belong.
Do you feel the same way about alcohol?
What's next? Cocaine?
Okay.
Meth?
Okay. I respect that. Do you? Any other suggestions?
I mean, as far as the zones where we allow, I agree. I think the easiest thing to do is to just match it up with alcohol. I'm interested in the feet within a school, daycare, residential treatment. Like, I'm interested in that, but my concern is that when we overlap those maps, how much space does that give us? And are we going to end up blocking it completely? And so do we want to prioritize those? In my mind, I would want to have more space from a residential treatment facility, and if we have to give ground on the school, because they're going to have to be carting people anyway, that would be maybe where I would prioritize. Maybe how I would want to say that. Does that make sense, James?
Yep.
And do you have an idea of what that if we did overlay those maps? Because we have
Yeah,
a
I'm
lot
not
of
sure,
schools
yeah,
and
I'm
a
not
lot
sure
of
where,
parks.
you know, that if you were to do all of them, I'm not sure how that looks with, you know, you have parks, you have, schools, daycare facilities kind of intermingled throughout our community, so I'm not sure what that looks like.
And I know we'd get into trouble if we
When
did that and then.
Yeah, when I do look at, you know, our shoreline zone, which can be up to 1,000 feet around the lake, it is a considerable area, so something I guess to consider there.
James?
So within the 1,000, and just to clarify, I strongly agree with treating dispensaries very similarly as to off-sale liquor and how that is worked within zoning. Within the 1,000 feet for a school, that's obviously the more restrictive and more conservative approach for that. It does get quite complicated when we're including all the schools plus the 500 feet for, you know, that is going to be a significant amount of overlap. And so primary education versus secondary education is a dramatic difference, especially when we were talking about alcohol or cannabis. It's a very much different situation. There's a loss of innocence as you migrate into secondary. So the necessity as for retaining for a primary education facility, be that even if it is a combined private school that, you know, has, you know, primary through a good majority of secondary, the primary takes the precedence for me. So primary education 1,000 feet, but secondary, because just so happens one of our schools is very close to a corridor less than 500 feet from that corridor, which has some TN2 in it, but there's also there's sides of me that say follow along with off-sale liquor with an exception of TN2.
Thank you. Any other contributions? Yes, Mike?
Not to double up on my time. One of the and I agree with all the themes that I'm hearing here. One of the parallels, and struggling because I did not dig up the number that I once looked at for how many off-sale alcohol establishments do we currently have in our TN2 districts?
Within TN2?
Within the TN2, and it was like maybe 3.
Yeah, I
So
couldn't only
it's
count
very nominal. You know, it may be the Holiday up on Mill Avenue. I can't remember if it goes that far up, plus that liquor store there. And then, you know, when you get to H Avenue, the restaurant is actually a different zone district. That four-way intersection is a different, Mill Avenue and H intersections differently zoned. And there was like one other. So you know, this is where I'm comfortable saying, you know, if we were to exclude it from our TN established, I want to keep echoing the established TN2 neighborhoods, you know, we could do the same with alcohol for that matter and simply allow these other ones as an existing nonconformity. You know, and say, boom, now we have the consistency there and it's easy to regulate with the permits. When you look at like the TN3, that's more like a raw piece of land come in and it's an iterative process, it's a public input process, it's like a plan unit development. You know, you're having public hearings, you're getting public input. I think these things can fit in the TN3 PUD land because you're looking at it in an overall master plan, like we did with Country Manor was a PUD. How many times did we go through and look at the plans, what uses are allowed, which are conditional, and they have to come back and get a conditional use permit for those. I would imagine that is a perfect place where you could say in a residential neighborhood, it's planned, it's just part of building that neighborhood from raw land up. So I'm pretty comfortable with doing that. It's the TN2s that are established that I'm thinking, you know, the alcohol sale's been there for a long time. This is a new use, you know, and does that impact people? And Brent, thank you so much, man, for pulling that up. So we can kind of get an appreciation for where these neighborhoods are, and you can think about, where things are. There's not that many places for off sale in the TN2, so that's the key. You're looking at Oak Street, you're looking at Kingwood Street, you're looking at Mill Avenue. And that's it, so those are sort of the key places in the city. So I would be saying that, that we maybe just simply say that the established TN2s are just sort of not a place for these. Allow them into the future, TN3s. You look at Main Street, you look at Town Center going all the way over to the Northern Pacific Center. You can imagine Mike Higgins building maybe a hotel there someday, right? And maybe there's a dispensary in part of one of the railroad buildings, and that's okay. That's a planned unit development spot, so that's pretty straightforward. Maybe Country Manor wants to come back and have a dispensary there for the aches and pains of us old folks, and perfect, come back in those kinds of scenarios. So I'm mostly looking at TN2 as the place that we should think hard about whether we want those dispensaries to get set up in those neighborhoods. There's that cute little old country corner store right next to the senior center on that's Kingwood, right? It's just a little thing on the east side of the block, and boy, it'd make a great dispensary store. But I mean, and you want that next to the senior center, and it's related to certain private schools in the neighborhood and so forth. As far as the spacing, how to buffer, I would look to see what the League of Cities does and what the state puts in the draft proposal. Those would be the great numbers to lift out of that rather than us try and figure that out. But I really think your point, Tiffany, on when you overlay it, what's left, would be an interesting GIS exercise just to say, if I allow this much buffer on this kind of use, where can I put these? And it may be that they only fit on Washington.
I want to take that and just a thought towards staff direction and see if there's consensus on this. What if you did a little what-if scenarios, right? What if it's 500 feet from a school and this, how much property is left? What if we said we exclude TN2? Is this going to take up too much staff time? I don't want to use too much of your time, but if we could begin to go, oh, here's 5 blocks, or really we've reduced it down to like 3 spots in town. We want to make sure that entrepreneurs that are coming in are going to. I mean, if you're going to do this, you're going to invest money. The Rise dispensary that's going in Baxter, it's about a $400,000 build out. Because this isn't just, renting a space and throwing up a counter. This is putting in security, video, all of these things, and all the accountability the dispensary is going to have. Do you think you could help us kind of understand?
Yeah, so I'll add, they talked about this at the roundtable as well. It is quite an investment. A lot of people talked about potentially municipal ones. So if you get the land for free, you're maybe at $500,000 between the build out and getting inventory and, putting all that stuff. But if you're looking at a new one that you're purchasing and having to do your own stuff with, it could be up to $1 million to do something like that. And what's interesting too is you can't receive traditional financing as well. So because of some of the federal laws.
They haven't changed the schedule.
Yep. So what they had said is it takes a considerable amount of your own investment and investors to do something like this. So that's kind of one part of it. I kind of think of the commercial corridor. You have St. Francis School and you have Riverside. So in my mind, that would probably knock out most of the commercial corridor district from doing one. If you were to go up to 1,000 feet, maybe it would leave then maybe kind of only the Cub Food area. When I was talking to the ones that do own other dispensaries around the country, I'd say Washington Street would probably be your most likely place with a potential for downtown. But again, I'm guessing Washington Street would be most enticing because of the traffic, similar to a liquor store.
2 things. What about AEC and MLAP? Wouldn't that preclude the Cub area as well, that school?
So which school is that?
The alternative school? Like
yeah,
right
if
by
they,
the funeral home?
if they're licensed there as a school, yeah, that would probably potentially, take a big chunk out of that area as well. And 1,000 is the most a city can do. City could say 200 feet, 300 feet. So 1,000 is the most you can do. It can always be scaled down if the city does want to put something in place.
I guess the other thing that I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly, because I had never considered this before. There are cities that are planning municipal dispensaries?
Osseo.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that was probably half of the questions there had to do with municipal dispensaries.
Well, municipal liquor store, right?
Well, and seriously, the city of Osseo is pursuing it.
Okay.
And the most obvious property they had was a public, kind of a law enforcement building. I thought, no, this isn't going to work. So they're looking at another site. But that city is seriously, they're like, hey, there's money to be made here. This is a great opportunity, and they're moving forward on it, whatever it's worth. I want to, I think we need to be creative with these buffers too. For instance, let's say there's somebody who wants to rent a space in the Tyrell Hills shopping center there, in next to Ace Hardware. Well, that's hypothetically there. Now there are, 300 feet from Riverside School? But seriously, what is the threat to a student at Riverside from all the way across the highway in the parking lot in another business? I begin to think we're kind of getting a little abstract in our fears here, and but
I would be more concerned about how close it is to Vicky Kinney's
well, there we go.
location. I think that is a
There we go. But ultimately, there are dangers everywhere, and you have to learn how to take care of yourself. Is there any ideas that we want to, I know we're sort of in a holding pattern right now, because I think I agree with Mike, we want to look at what the League of Cities is doing in terms of a model ordinance. What research or homework do you think we could do between now and then that would make us?
So I got a lot of some of these clarifications from the League of Minnesota Cities, what we can do. I don't think they're going to bring out a model ordinance. It's going to be the
OCM.
Department that's going to be doing
OCM's
it.
gonna do
Yep.
All right.
So I don't have much faith that we're gonna have that in time to do anything. So, maybe I'm just a pessimist.
Maybe just realistic.
So I don't think we want to wait for those.
How,
I'm not opposed to waiting a little longer to see if it just,
how much of the toothpaste do you want to keep in?
Yeah.
I don't mind having a little bit of toothpaste out on the counter, but I think we definitely want to have our plans ready to go to the city council by summer.
Tiffany, then do you think, should we direct staff towards beginning to get the bones of an ordinance?
I think that's, depending on how much time, James, you think you need to
Yeah,
bring us.
one idea that I'm hearing is maybe we don't do the TN2 district. That TN2 can be really integrated into a neighborhood at times. Harrison Elementary is in a TN2 district, for instance, so that could maybe help with some of the maybe elementary schools. Riverside's kind of unique, where it's located at within that commercial corridor district, but isn't really next to any of the businesses that are there too much. So, maybe you do 100-foot, buffer between schools, something like that to somewhat keep it away from, a school like Riverside, but not completely restrict the commercial corridor district. So that'd be one potential option, 150 feet. That's just kind of what I'm coming up with right now. I don't know if there's any considerations from something like that.
I would think, and anybody can add to this if they wish, that if you could, maybe not the next meeting, I think we need to start moving along here. If we can start getting, we're not ready for a public hearing and anything like that at this point, but if you can help us draft a model ordinance, is that going too far if I say that? Or suggest changes to our existing ordinances concerning liquor stores that could be adapted? If you could come up with
I think I'm getting some direction here that,
Okay.
we could do a draft ordinance on the next one. It seems like TN2, and that could still be discussed in the future ones, whether or not we, want to add it, but I'm getting some direction here.
Okay.
And James, I'm gonna need pictures. I'm gonna need maps with
We do, yeah, our county
It's
program that we
certain-
have does do a good job. That's how we send out our notice of hearings, because we can do a shaded area around 350 feet for our notices. So I can just pull that up and show where some of our schools are, where does that overlap, that type of thing.
Very good. Mike, do you have anything you want to
Just
add?
trying to think about, to build a timeline, to me, it seems like we ought to have our thoughts crystal clear as much as a commission can be crystal clear on something, probably by August, because then you got to turn around and you'd have to give that a hearing, and then move on to city council. This needs a couple of readings there. Maybe it comes back like a short-term rental. You know what I mean? So suddenly you're late into the fall. So if we were to put a timeline on this, we need to be having something at least that represents our consensus by our August meeting.
Good.
So that feels right to you.
Yeah, what I'm kind of thinking is, maybe the next meeting is a little bit more exploratory again with some of the maps. I can bring kind of a proposed ordinance to begin looking at it. Then the next meeting, I think we could get, maybe a lot more concrete after we take a look at some of those maps. And then maybe we just hold off for a couple of months to see, if there's more information that comes out, with the intent that, maybe a July or August meeting, that we bring it back after, if we get more clarification from the department.
Very good.
Kind of my thoughts.
Mike, Colin, anything else?
Mr. Chair, yes. Currently, do we have sort of the setbacks from schools and rehab centers for liquor stores and places that sell tobacco?
We do have some provisions for it. I want to say it might be 300 feet. We did look at a brewery with that, which I think then was going to be potential off sale. I can't remember if it was related to the brewery or off sale. I think it was off sale. I think there was a 300-foot requirement from schools for that. I can do more research to have that for the next meeting.
Is that,
Oh, sorry.
I just was wanting to clarify how that's measured. Is that property line to property line?
It'd be
From
property line to
front door
property line.
Front door.
Yep,
To
property line to property
The
line.
Riverside example, is it, you're 300 feet, you're on the property line of the Thai Royal Shopping Center, and is that
How far would the kid have to run to get to the
exactly, and how many cars, you make it all the way across the traffic, only to be frustrated to find out the property line's too close. I'm sorry, Colin, thank you.
Oh, well,
For
just,
that clarifying.
oh, yeah, just that, I don't know if making it a longer walking distance from a high school, that's not what's gonna, stop, say, a minor from acquiring it. It's the fact that they won't sell to them. They're not 18.
You're not going to have an ID.
Right. So, my concerns for dispensaries would be the same as my concerns for liquor stores, or a lot of high schoolers they're vaping now, which is not the best. But so I don't know. I'm not convinced that having the dispensary set back from schools or rehab centers, maybe rehab centers. But I'm not convinced that that might add more complication than functional usefulness, in my opinion.
Other thoughts on this before we're ready to move on tonight?
I think August is going to be late.
You're right.
I
Okay.
think that's going to be, I think June might be
Okay,
where we need to be.
all right.
If we go simpler at first, it might go faster, and then they can push back. Or if we come in really complicated, I don't know how this process goes, but that's my thought. If we go simple at first, and someone pushes back.
The other problem with that is that it simple opens the door to all sorts of what if? What if? You didn't say what if this happened?
Right.
But I get what you're coming at. I think the consensus is we want to move faster than slower. So I think we have a consensus on that. James, do you think you have what you need to get going on this?
Yep, so that's kind of the first part.
Mike, anything else to add?
You heading to question 4 at all?
So I was thinking about maybe going, so that was only, kind of question number 1.
Right. Yes.
We're going to simplify it now.
Yeah. Question number 2 is maybe more of a city council type thing, but,
Zoning.
Okay.
That's
maybe-
not zoning.
okay.
Let that one go.
So then, number 3, I think this might be kind of an overlap between city council and planning and zoning. maybe this is in the business license section, but maybe planning commission can make a recommendation on it. There needs to be some type of ordinance, and I discussed this at the roundtable discussion. If the city wants to limit the number of them, there should be some type of concrete ordinance that says if the county meets their number required, the city of Brainerd will not issue a license. If, does the city want to allow one if that is a requirement and then not issue any more? Should be an ordinance as well. So right now we don't know if Brainerd's going to be required to have one or two, but there should be some type of ordinance that says in the event there's a cap number that's hit, does Brainerd want to still allow them? And one of the reasons behind the state of Minnesota capping it, from what we heard at the roundtable discussion, is actually kind of for the businesses themselves as well. They kind of referenced Oklahoma, which didn't have any type of cap numbers or how many could be potentially in an area, and it was kind of a free for all. A lot of them opened apparently, and there was way too many dispensaries, and then there became major issues. So that, I think, was one of the thought processes of trying to kind of disperse these maybe throughout the state and throughout the county.
Very good. And then we haven't discussed cultivation, and that probably needs to get included in it as well.
Yep. So yeah, maybe we discuss this one, and then after that we talk about cultivation.
Okay. Are we good on it? Oh, no, we're not. We're not.
Well, I think you were looking for some feedback on this one, and then.
Yeah, does planning commission think that there should be, a cap on the number based on whatever the state laws are?
Number one, I think, I feel strongly that we should not, we should be independent of whatever Crow Wing County does. I mean, we're the city, we make our own decisions, and so they reach their cap and they want to cut it off, that's fine. We shouldn't link to that in my mind. And I'm thinking if we do our job and putting these things in the right places, I think the number of them that we have is going to be a moot point. The market will basically, maybe like Oklahoma, but the market will drive things at that point. As long as we've got them in the right spots for how that fits in our community and fits with our comp plan and such. So that, I'm not too terribly worried about capping, but.
No. Mr. Chair, I have thoughts. Oh, but, okay.
Tiffany,
Okay.
we'll go Tiffany first.
So if we decide not to have a cap, but Crow Wing County has a cap of 10, could we have 20 within the city limits of Brainerd?
That would be my understanding, and then other municipalities wouldn't have to allow any of them if they have that by ordinance.
Okay, so the county's 10.
I don't think
If
they
not-
could. I don't think they could trump the municipality
They can't
by not
limit
allowing
us.
them.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
I will pull an arbitrary number and say that I think I do want to have a cap in place. If we don't know if it can cap it at 1 or 2, then I want to cap it at 2 because I don't want to get sued. We have a history. It's just a few lawsuits we've lost over the years. I don't know if 2 is the right arbitrary number either. I could be convinced higher, but I don't want to. I feel like we should have a cap in place of some arbitrary number.
I personally suspect the market will cap itself, but Colin?
Mr. Chair, I agree with that. I think if we're moving to treat dispensaries like just another business, then maybe in that sense a cap doesn't make sense. It may be that too many open and then some fail. My understanding is that even in areas that have legalized it, there is sort of a lingering, ongoing underground sale, like those networks remain. I think as a city, we have an interest in, bringing as much of that to light as we can, minimizing those underground networks. And, these are businesses that, they pay property taxes. I think it's a good thing that we have potentially, more than 1 or 2 of them, and we have more competition that way. So that it's more of a legalized commerce, and yeah, I don't think I don't see a cap as being necessary myself.
Mr. Chair, if I could just, I think I want to see the map again with the overlays before I have too strong of an opinion on it.
I think we can pick the caps at the next meeting. Maybe we can get into the caps as we go along.
Yep.
But it's going to be a good discussion. I think there's definitely good points on both sides. James, anybody else? I don't mean to cut this off here, but are we ready to hand it to James and let him get something ready for the next meeting?
Can we talk
I
about
think we have
growing?
4.
You want to? I thought we were going to do cultivation
man.
down the line. You want to do cultivation? I thought we had said we were going to do cultivation down the line, but we can talk about it.
This is down the line, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's go.
Yep, so, with this one, there was discussions on this. Apparently, maybe not as much with the cultivation, but a lot of the places that do cultivation also manufacture it there, and there's a drying process with that. So there can be a smell that is emitted from them. So that's where staff probably does recommend that this, if it were to be allowed in the city, I don't think there's a requirement from what I heard. The dispensaries are the requirement. Again, there's still not full information from the department on what's required here. But because of that manufacturing process, and they admitted that at the roundtable discussion, potentially it would just maybe be the industrial zone that would be allowed.
I would support that.
But
It's a manufacturing process, right? There's
That's
not a
correct, and then-
retail- There's not a retail aspect to that.
The only one, there's also something like a microbrewery that also then would maybe only be allowed in the industrial zone. So there is a cultivation, manufacturing, and that's only for certain sizes. Again, not a ton of information on that. They have a definition of what that looks like. But you probably wouldn't want manufacturing, cultivating, type microbrew things in a commercial corridor district. So I think a lot of municipalities are going to be looking at that as probably just industrial as well.
I would suspect if we have plenty of electricity for
We can dry the heck out of this now.
perhaps we can convert the Bitcoin.
It could be a heat sink.
Let's see where I'm going here.
It can give you a heat sink.
capture the heat.
We're gonna get rich. All right,
Cannabis coins.
all right. Do we have a .5?
Could we look at, I know that when we did the animal clinic, that's not really an animal clinic, but we looked at having air filtration requirements and to try and keep any odors that might happen contained.
I'm thinking when this does come out and these would be licensed, there would probably be MPCA requirements as well for that. So, and it would be a new facility. They wouldn't try to retrofit anything. So I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue.
Any other questions? Mike?
Mr. Chair, my sense is that our general commercial and our commercial corridor properties are way too valuable to allow a growing operation there. The closest you can come for a parallel is a greenhouse, but a greenhouse, you have on-sale retail activity and those sorts of things. So it brings some retail activity there. But I think we would want to protect our commercial districts from a growing operation, which will largely be an industrial box, with indoor growing facilities and drying facilities. I wonder about our rural living districts, whether we want that out there. My gut says, again, general industrial is a place for growing and processing. But if, we've got this larger land base, if you think about Wise Road up that way, will we allow that on our rural
But
living?
dividing them between manufacturing and cultivation, it is agronomy in the cultivation sense. It is very much agronomy. And so, but in manufacturing, so if you're trying to do a combined facility kind of a situation, there is a defined difference between those two things. But it's, because there's plenty of CSAs and, little farmer market kind of situations when we get out into our more rural situations that they do have retail of their produce. But there is no manufacturing within what they are doing. The the difference within cannabis is going to be the manufacturing portion of that. So growing it is different.
Yeah.
Right, like there's the refined products, sometimes like the gummies or whatever, that might be more manufacturing.
And there's even more, just within the cultivation, there is a manufacturing process that I'm no expert. I should definitely qualify that. But you have to, once cultivating and harvesting, there is manufacturing process that needs to occur to that product before it is.
Oh,
Yeah. So no matter what, you can grow it, but you have to work the product, and that's definitely moving into a manufacturing situation. They oftentimes are found together. But if you're going to define them, it's, agronomy and defined within agronomy, you're trying to make money off of something that you grew. It's definitely agronomy.
but my sense is that just it would be, probably the growing and processing is probably a lower value use of space, so they probably wouldn't necessarily even try to
Yeah.
locate in commercial corridors, even if it was allowed, is my guess. But supporting that with an ordinance I would support that.
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer too. I think you're going to look at places where land is cheap and power is relatively cheap and things like this.
So for the rural living, commercial greenhouses are a permitted use. They go see James and they say, I want to put up a greenhouse. And I don't know if a greenhouse is specifically designed in here to be glass-sided or a closed lighted facility or what, And so taking Commissioner Norwood's perspective of the agronomy, and our ordinance currently allows commercial greenhouses in our rural living districts, and so.
Any manufacturing permitted there?
The manufacturing uses are not. So, once you've got a crop,
Yeah.
And
You're going to
and
either
you-
have to move it, or you're going to have to ask for a CUP in order to
right,
pull that off.
so you could grow it conceivably in our rural, but then the industrial processing of that is going to kick it to a different place.
And I believe that there is enough statute coming as for the, just even within the legal growing portions of that. I know that there is significant statute coming for the manufacturing portion of it. Again, I'm no expert.
So there are a lot of laws, and I would say where they have to really track inventory strong for some of these areas. So that's something that they talked about as well, not only for the dispensaries, but also when they're growing it. There's a lot of inventory tracking on it. It was interesting to look at because they showed pictures of some of these facilities. It looks like a factory. Very clean in there. There's all these different types of robotics, conveyor belts on how this, stuff gets done. It is possible to have a separation between the manufacturing and the greenhouse or growing portion of it, but I think what they had said it is kind of common for it to be combined. They talked about being kind of also in industrial, which was probably, more so than being in any of the type of the commercial areas. But they also said it's almost a lot of these would be placed just outside of the municipality where they could have, maybe like a large well, and then just be outside of some of the city restrictions as well. So that seemed to be something that was almost more advantageous than being within the city. If it was allowed in the city, they did talk about, a lot of other municipalities do have them just in the industrial zones.
I feel like at this point in the discussion, we need more information before we can start making informed judgments and directions. I think this is a big mystery, and I just think we need some solid information and case examples of how other communities have handled it. This is in Cottage Grove. I think there's a big growing facility there. There are areas that they're happening already for the medical cannabis industry. And it would be interesting to see what the industry looks for and how local government responds to it. So I think we can learn a few things that way.
Yeah, I can certainly bring at the next meeting, try to look into other Minnesota. That's a good idea because I'm sure there's some people growing it right now for medical purposes. So we can see if there's any existing ordinances for that on the industrial side of things.
Get a little smarter.
I have a question. I don't know even who it's for, and it's definitely going to betray my ignorance about something or other. Is there a market because there's now a person can have a plant. Is there a market for seedlings? Are they even called seedlings? Is that something that,
There
you
are
know,
people
is that
selling
something that we
seedlings.
would have to be, I don't even know if it would be a problem. Is that something we have to consider in, say, our rural living where we have a greenhouse, that they're then selling seedlings and it's not processed or manufactured?
I can look in to see where sales happen. I don't know if people are allowed to buy them online, if it has to be from a nursery, or how that, you know.
Okay.
Right now it's allowed to grow. I'm not sure where they're getting the seeds from, so I can look into
I
that.
believe you can take a course, and where you take a course, you're provided with seedlings. I've
Oh.
read this in the newspaper, that it's out there. So I think this is just a separate part of the law. The private use is a separate part. And, yeah, there's still a lot of questions there. People are saying, you know, the state law says, well, you can't grow your own stuff and sell it. Well, you can grow your own tomatoes and sell it, so I mean, why are we making some of these distinctions here? But I think, again, we need more information here. But we got to kick the process on, but we need to do a little more homework.
Sounds good?
And if we could be conscious about the zoning issues versus the licensing issues, the number two question, I think belongs to city council about, you know, how do you license these things? Gets at the question of can you sell seedlings and how do you do that? But the zoning says where do you allow it, you know, and that's the piece that hopefully we can focus our thoughts on that, explore and learn as much as we can to Chairman Gorman's point, and then come up with, you know, at least the recommendations that's part of our niche as the zoning folks making recommendations on land use and growth.
And so would planning commission also like to, you know, continue to consider how many are allowed in the community? That will probably fall under the city code section in business licensing, but could be a recommendation, you know, from the planning commission, because it still kind of talks about how many would be allowed in the community.
I'd rather punt that one to, and again, if it's in the right spot, you know,
It's something I think Safety and Public Works, you know, could undertake instead. Because it would fall under business.
How's that bus feel?
punt that down to the.
Well, yeah, as to who makes the decision on that, I don't know necessarily, but yeah, I do think you know, if there's only one or two of those dispensaries in town, they're going to have higher prices, and there's going to be much more room for sort of those informal networks to move their product. Whereas if we have more competition, prices are lower. We're sort of defunding some of those informal networks that, you know, that's kind of where crime happens a little bit. So.
And to kind of piggyback on your thought there, we have to look at, we're not an island here. It's, you know, in 10 minutes I can be in Nisswa, and if Nisswa has the best store in town, best store in the county, BLA, people will go to Nisswa.
They couldn't be that
10
much
minutes,
higher, right.
you know? And so I don't think we can pretend like we've got our little fiefdom and we can have our way with our world completely. We can't.
Enterprise.
There you go, it's free enterprise. So again, it's that mix of freedom and restrictions and all that stuff.
For the sake of tongue in cheek, I think what I'm hearing is that we should allow only one, and it should be a municipal dispensary.
There it is.
Really good one.
Is that in the form of a motion, Mr. Norwood?
No, that was definitely tongue in cheek.
I'm just checking again.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if it would be, if we're going to have a joint workshop.
Joint?
Oh my gosh,
Boom.
I just walked into
Slip
that.
that in there.
It might be a good idea to add just like 5 or 10 minutes to update the city council together with us, just so that we're all on the same page on this.
I would entertain a hard cap on the time limit
Yeah.
for the discussion of cannabis, as to primarily to significantly solve the one issue, and hopefully there's enough dialogue within the one issue that you're able to solve all future issues. Because the main problem is the degradation of communication as to what the expectations are.
Some clarity would be good.
And maybe what we would want to clarify on this is which parts are being dealt with by which body.
That's one approach. The other approach is we just go ahead and we say we have this menu of things, and the city council will come along and say, no, we don't want you doing caps or whatever. But at least we've done our part, and we've done it within our reason, being zoning and things like this. We've created we have our sense of reason, and then they can say, pooey to your ideas. I don't know. So there are two different approaches on it. And I would say, I would personally, if we start out less restrictive and let them make it more restrictive as we go. But the other approach is you say, narrow us down to our two things that we're going to work on. I would say a wider range it would be my view, but that's just my 2 cents.
I have to deal with it all anyway, whether it's here or safety and public works.
I can
or,
sit home and watch you on TV. Uh-huh. James.
So would planning commission like to add that to the workshop? Maybe we'd do that in a motion, if you would.
I'm wary of that personally.
There may be a lot more that we still have to consider before we'd be ready for that, showing the
don't think I'm
maps.
Fair, it's fair.
We'll get our cards together and then we'll go to the table and we'll see what happens.
I'll try to do a better job of liaising on this than I did the last thing.
You did great on last night. You did great. I appreciated it. You stood up for us. All right. Are we there? Any other suggestions? Or are we going to let James do a little work? James, do you have any more questions for us?
No more questions.
All right. With that, I dare say.
Sure, I would just like to thank James, and now I'm done.
All right. I'm going to swing this gavel, Duval. All right. I'm going to open a public forum at 8:20 for any matters, citizens to address any matters not on the agenda. Still open? Anybody online? Nobody online. 8:20. We're going to close it at 8:20, and then we move on to staff reports. James?
Yeah, just wanted to add a couple quick updates from the EDA. So the EDA website is set to go online at the end of February with a promotional video that Visit Brainerd has been working on. The website has been kind of done in conjunction by Swanson Hascamp, as well as Visit Brainerd's been doing kind of the main website. And this will help market some of our own Brainerd properties, but also an opportunity for private property owners that maybe don't have it listed on the open market that, want to advertise potential development opportunities. So that is set to go online to have a standalone website for the EDA at the end of February here. Also, the EDA also entered into a brokerage agreement to begin marketing City of Brainerd properties. This would be specifically our industrial Wright Street extension as well as the industrial park. This hasn't been marketed for a number of years, so exciting to get that going as well.
Very good, thank you. All right, we are on to commissioners' reports, member reports, committee member reports, get it right here. Start with Mr. Peterson.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
This is our chance, your chance once a meeting to stand on the soapbox and say, I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking about that, or this great thing's happening in a community, or this outrage is it's an open forum.
All right, I got a pet peeve of mine.
Let's go.
I'm a builder.
Yeah.
The 5-foot setbacks on garages, I don't know who thought that up, but it's a terrible rule.
Okay.
There is no way to stop water from dropping in front of a garage when you do that.
All right. I think I'm not going to touch that because I don't even know where to go with that. But I appreciate you spoke your mind.
I would like to address that, to be honest.
Well, here's what you do. What you do then is you talk to James and say, James, I have a concern on this, and maybe start a dialogue with James and the department to see what their perspective is. And if there's something comes of it, eventually you come back and to the group and you say, here's a proposed change to the ordinance. So there's a process.
Okay.
And I would start the process by talking to James and talking to his department and the building people and get their side of the story. And, if you still have the questions, come on back and we can certainly look at changes. So, yeah.
Okay.
That helps.
It's only, I didn't come prepared for that.
You had something, though. You pulled it right out of your pocket. That was good. Tiffany.
I have nothing.
Got nothing. All right. James?
Potentially looking for a brief update on the South 8th Street D.W. Jones project and where we're sitting at with that.
So Eric talked about that a little bit at council. I haven't spoke with the developer in a few months here. They still do have to go through the planning process. I think, I've looked at preliminary designs, given them feedback. They're waiting to see where the funding comes in for that. I believe what Eric had said, and I don't know the amount, that there was a recommendation from the county to fund. I'm not sure if the county did fully fund them or if the HRA recommended that. So that's part of the funding piece for it. The big one is the application that state of Minnesota released. I think it's 39 billion, I want to say, for workforce housing. So that's what they're going to be applying for. And the application, I think Eric had said, is due sometime in April. Hopefully they hear something in July. They'd be anticipating potentially a fall construction with starting to demolish the existing Thrifty White in that spot and then kind of move forward with the rest of the process. So I think that's kind of the biggest piece. The TIF districting had already been done. Part of the workforce housing grant is I think there has to be matching in-kind funds from the city, which, you have the TIF district, you have the River to Rails project, and then potentially money from the Crow Wing County Housing Trust Fund as well. So that kind of helps build that bigger pool to allow D.W. Jones to apply for more from that workforce housing grant coming from the state of Minnesota. So that's kind of where they're at, and there hasn't been a lot of design changes or anything they've approached the planning department with. That's, I think, the next biggest hurdle for them.
Very good. All right, let's skip down to Colin.
Sure, yeah. So, oh shoot, someone else go first. 1 minute.
Mike? Let's go to Mike.
Sure.
We'll go back to Colin.
Robins are 200 miles to our south. I just want you to know that, and that's all I have to report.
Oh, man. Colin, all
I
right.
have nothing.
You got nothing? Did you find it there, Colin?
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I watched a video of a previous meeting, and you had spoken about sort of budgetary considerations that I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, and to what extent are we allowed to sort of consider the effects, budgetary effects on the city of certain developments or certain zoning policies and that sort of thing?
I know where you're coming from. It's when you read the bylaws of the commission, they're more expansive than what we really do. They open up some like oversight of budgets and how budgets affect things that are in the comp plan and things like this.
Okay.
And I just don't know if the city council is ready for the planning commission to step into the budget process.
I was,
Let yourself,
Wait until
explain
I get my
yourself.
half a loaf of bread.
All right, yeah. Am I interpreting where you're coming from right?
well, my thoughts are more that if we make certain decisions for, say, allowing dispensaries in a certain spot, or there's tax revenue ramifications for the city budget.
Sure.
And are we allowed to consider those tax revenue ramifications when making decisions? If we say, okay, we think this is not a high enough value use of this land. My understanding is half of our municipal budget comes from grants. I assume from the state.
Is that right, James? Out of curiosity?
It would,
There's a considerable number. It has to do with how
Okay.
I can't remember the exact term for it, but where your medium household income is at, the state can give certain amounts of money to different municipalities with that.
that's different than like the LGA, like our overall budget. We
Okay.
get a lot of money from LGA
Okay.
and other intergovernmental.
I know you kind of talked about, I think ordinances can certainly be considered with, potential budgetary considerations. CUPs are kind of different than that because that deals mainly with land use applications.
Okay.
But, when you're considering your ordinance changes and how that could, drive maybe economic development or hurt economic development, I think those are definitely considerations.
Okay. Yeah. I think the more that we can slowly move towards having more of our municipal budget generated by the city itself, and I don't know exactly what that would look like, but that's something that I'm interested in.
I would agree with you. And one of the interests I've always had too is to look at, people say Brainerd needs, better jobs. Brainerd has terrific jobs. Brainerd needs more people with the terrific jobs to live in town and to invest in the town. Because in a way, we're running a business, and property tax is what's going to come in the coffers. And the more that we can support, you look at, we can talk all night. We start to look at average incomes of like Brainerd versus Baxter and things like this, and you can see the relative poverty of some towns and the challenges they face, especially a town with an older infrastructure like Brainerd. It becomes a really interesting discussion. So yeah, I agree with the general idea.
Okay.
Okay, interesting.
All right.
All right, I've got one thing. This is just, this is the start of the legislative season, of course, down in St. Paul, so all sorts of things. Bills are being proposed every day, and things are coming out. There's been a move, a lot of it starts with the 2040 plan of the city of Minneapolis, and it was the move to take neighborhoods that were devoted towards single-family housing and break them up, and to move into more higher density housing, to allow more apartments and duplexes and townhouses into what used to be single family housing. There's a movement towards this. And the 2040 plan in Minneapolis is caught up in the courts now. But there is an interesting bill that's in the state legislature. It's a bipartisan bill. And here's a quote from the Tribune. This bill would supersede local zoning rules and require cities of 5,000 or more to legalize at least 6 types of homes from a menu that includes duplexes, cottage clusters, townhouses, small apartment buildings. Smaller cities under 5,000 would just have to allow duplexes. I don't know if you guys consider what this means. What this means is the state could create, what they can do is they could create the zoning rules for everyone and just take away what we had. And I can sort of see where they're coming from. There's one argument in there that I don't care for, and that is that local officials will vote against townhouses or higher density housing because of the people that come to the meetings and raise their voices. And so the notion is, well, if you make this more of an administrative project where somebody just can come to James and say, I want to put in a 12-unit apartment building on the north side, I have the land, I want to put this in, and it can be an administrative decision, then we've taken out all of this public input, and we've taken out the input of bodies like us that I think would do a pretty thoughtful job on this, and we're really trying to consider all of the aspects of a healthy city, the single-family homes and the multifamily homes, the rentals, the ownership, and everything. So I think this bill is something we all should be paying attention to, and I'm just going to throw this to James and say, what are you thinking of this?
I do think it's interesting with our current zoning code that we have. I think we're probably more forward thinking than a lot of communities, in our traditional neighborhoods and CN neighborhoods. We do allow up to 4 as long as it fits the site. So I think we're further ahead than a lot of other communities are, but yeah, the state actually regulating that to do it just administratively with no CUP requirements or anything, I guess in my opinion, that'd probably be overstepping what the state should be allowed to do. They don't know the communities. CUP allows you to attach conditions to, maybe mitigate, impacts on neighboring properties. So yeah, I'll have to do a little bit more research on that and I guess see where that goes.
That's a thoughtful response. I appreciate that. Here's a quote from one of the sponsors. Now is the time to legalize more housing choices. That takes a while to unpack what they're saying. There's a lot in that. But anyhow, that's on my mind. That's what struck me this week, reading the news and what it could mean to local communities and how we could kind of lose a voice in creating our own communities. I'm not too pleased with it myself, but I do understand the motivation behind it because zoning rules have always been used to keep certain people in certain neighborhoods, and they've often had a dark side of it. With all that being said,
But then there's a,
File and house file numbers on that?
I don't. I have. If you have access to the Star Tribune, if you have access to it, otherwise, I think you're going to see it in the news. I think you can go on NPR's news site. I bet you'll find it on NPR News. I couldn't find a house number on it yet, but it's interesting. It has both Republican and Democratic supporters at this point, and that's just not happening in the legislature these days. So this is really interesting. That's an issue that's crossing parties right now. And we'll see. And there's definitely the DFL leadership. There are some people who seem to be signing on it. I don't know where the governor is on it. But I don't think it's far-fetched that maybe cities should raise their voices. The League of Minnesota Cities has come out opposed to it. They do not like it, naturally. And so I think this is going to be an issue to pay attention to in the next couple, 3 months.
We should raise our comprehensive plans, not our voices, because there's the guidance that we're implementing. Our community's already thought about this.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
We built an ordinance to try and give body to that vision, so.
We sure did. That was part of the heart of it when we went through that whole process, especially going through the zoning process, was to look at these concepts. So I just kind of find this really strikes me as a one-size-fits-all that's not going to fit all in any which way or form. So I'm a little nervous about this one.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
A comment. My understanding is they eliminated single-family zoning throughout Minneapolis. That they didn't get nearly the redevelopment they were expecting because they still had many restrictions, such as height restrictions, the amount of the lot you could build on restrictions, setback restrictions, that kind of thing. So functionally, I wonder how much this would really, even if we were, forced to change our zoning, I wonder how much this would really do if we still have, our existing setbacks and whatnot in place. If we wanted to liberalize zoning, there are other regulations to look at, and then we could still do it our way.
Have you been following the debate? Because a lot of what I see they talk about the term environmental concerns, the people that are suing against the plan.
Environmental concerns in terms of greenhouse emissions? I'm
Well,
not sure.
it's just, I think, I don't know if there's going to be environmental that way or just like the environment, changing the environment. I'm not really sure.
Oh,
But I
like
know
the
that there are
character
people
of the
who are taking Minneapolis to court on this, and it's caught up in the courts right now. But,
I'm not following that case, to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just interesting because what it stood out for is a very ambitious zoning plan to open up every neighborhood to denser housing, and especially to get denser housing around transportation hubs and things like this.
Right.
And that's why you can sort of read the effort in the state as a way to say, okay, we got stymied in the courts and stymied with this plan. What if we went statewide with it and just made it state law? That state law supersedes local laws, and that would, in a certain way, clean up a lot of things. I don't know. I think we all have some mixed feelings about that, but I think that's what this law is kind of aimed at, is kind of pushing those things faster and on a larger scale.
Agreed.
But I think it's a really interesting point. It's something worth following and the next couple, 3 months. And we'll see if it gets a consensus. And I don't know. Call your legislatures and your senators and representatives and tell them how you feel, maybe. All right. With all that being said, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? No? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. I've already gaveled, too late.
It's a non-debatable motion, Mr. Chair. Can't ask for discussion on it.
Thank you for waiting on that till it passed, so you